Chapter 54. After the guard captain sent them here, he coldly threatened them and left, making Freya grit her teeth in anger. This should be the second level of the dungeon. There are 32 cells here and there are 4 wardens. They are all light infantry from the 104th Swordsman Regiment of the White Mane Army. Brendel thought to himself as he sat alone in the darkness. This should be the second level of the dungeon. There are 32 cells here and there are 4 wardens. They are all light infantry from the 104th Swordsman Regiment. In the past, who didn't have a PK Red name in the game? This wasn't the first time he visited Fortress Reden's prison, but they were all locked up in the 3rd floor. In the eyes of the NPCs, the players were a bunch of lawless people. Thinking about this, Brando couldn't help but laugh. He took out the ebony gargoyle statue and touched it. The crack on it was almost undetectable. Then he turned around and asked in the dark, "Freya, Roman, how are you? Are you okay?" "Brando, how long will we be locked up?" Romaine's voice sounded uneasy. Brando thought to himself, so you also have times when you're afraid. The 2 girls were locked up in the opposite cell. Although it was dark, at least they were safe. Just as he wanted to say something to comfort her, he heard a bang from the darkness. Damn it! Those despicable bastards! All our hard work is not for these people. Freya slammed her fist on the wooden fence, gritting her teeth in anger. "You inside, what are you doing? Do you want to be whipped?" The jailer's fierce voice sounded from outside. Even though Freya was so angry that she wanted to rush out and beat up every single one of them, but she understood the situation she was in. She took a deep breath and calmed herself down. "Brando, what do we do?" she asked softly. Another voice immediately interrupted. "This is the dark prison, right? Auntie said that some people are locked up their whole lives and never see the light of day. Brando, will we be the same?" "Shut your crow's beak, Romaine," Freya replied in Brendel's place, annoyed. He smiled. "Do you still have hope for those people?" "I hope they all die." Freya gritted her teeth. "But without their help, Fortress Reden will be in danger." Brando walked to the door and replied softly. Freya was silent. "At least I tried my best," she replied. "My power is not limitless, I can only do this much for Butchie." Brando felt relieved. It seems that the night was worth it. In fact, he noticed that after the dream at the Golden Tree, Freya quickly. It was because of this that his Valkyrie training plan could be carried out, and he wanted Freya to be his assistant. An S-rank general in the game. This was a deal that would never be a loss. "It's good that you think that way," he replied. "Brando, do you have any ideas?" "Yes, you guys step back." Since Brando dared to come in, he must have a way to get out. The reason why he was so fearless was because he knew that the next night was going to be a nightmare. The funny thing was that the nobles of Fortress Reden didn't know about it. Freya had given these people a final chance, but they had locked her up here with a groundless accusation. Was this what they meant by seeking their own destruction? "Wait, Brando W, what are you doing? Don't do anything rash, this is the prison." Although Freya said that she wanted the nobles to die, she still thought of herself as Erwin's people. If she went out like that, wouldn't it be a rebellion? "I know what I'm doing." "What do you mean what you're doing?" "A Roman, talk to him." Freya couldn't help but lower her voice. On one hand, she hoped that the guards outside would come in and stop Brando's crazy actions, but on the other hand, she was worried that the people outside would notice what was going on inside. "Brando, I want to go out too," Romaine replied. "Shut up, I didn't ask you to persuade me like that." Freya wanted to cry. Did these 2 people not understand the situation they were in? Breaking out of the prison would result in a death sentence. When she thought that her 2 best companions might become wanted criminals, she couldn't help but feel a little helpless. Brando took out the Highland Squire card and threw it on the ground. The water EP that the Sacred Tree Secret Ground produced this week was immediately paid out. After a cloud of smoke, a young man wearing a long robe and carrying a large bundle of scrolls walked out. Brando already knew that before there was an elemental pool. The EP produced by the card would be paid out that week and would be lost. In other words, it couldn't be saved, but it could still be used within this week. "My name is the Shire Lord. I'm happy to serve you." The young man looked at him and bowed deeply. "You're a Highland mage?" Brando asked. "Apprentice." The young man added seriously. Brando found that he could inspect the other party's attributes. Highland Wizard Apprentice with 16 HP, 8 MP, and 2 spells. Basic Composition 2 MP, and Magic Arrow 1 MP. Knowledge System. Basic Magic, Composition Magic, Basic Knowledge, Local and Geographical Knowledge, and Level 1 Heraldry. You learned Law Magic? That's right. A law wizard was a type of wizard in a broad sense, dedicated to researching the power of the law. Their magic was a type of magic that manipulated the threads connecting the material world and the law world, using the energy of the gems to transform and materialize their power. There were 9 schools of wizards in the Amber Sword: Law Magic, Elemental Magic, String Magic, Witchcraft, Runic Magic, Holy Words, Astrology, Psychic Magic, and Magic Circle. In fact, each of these 9 schools represented a different set of magic systems, but ordinary people often couldn't tell the difference between them, so they were collectively called wizards. But this saying was not without reason, because after all, magic had one thing in common, and that was mystery. Brando, who's talking to you? Freya suddenly stopped and asked. Yes, my attendant. Brando replied. Attendant? The girl was stunned. Brando took out the soul crystal that contained the 10 feet silence spell, and threw it to the young man. Activate it. Although warriors couldn't use storage items, wizard apprentices could. The Shire took the crystal bead and injected 1 MP into it. The surface of the soul crystal glowed faintly, and the surroundings became silent. It was as if an invisible monster suddenly appeared in the darkness and swallowed all sound. Freya was also shocked. She suddenly found that she couldn't make a sound. Of course, she didn't know that this was Brando's masterpiece, and for a moment, her heart was pounding. After all, most ordinary people would react this way when faced with a mysterious spell. The Shire nodded to his lord. Brando turned around and took the opportunity to punch the thick wooden bars of the dungeon. After the battle with the golden demonic tree, Brando's hands were unprecedentedly rich. 965 EXP was enough for him to level up the mercenaries to level 8, and the militia to level 6. After leveling up to level 15, his strength had reached 5 ounces, and after the power burst it exceeded 10 ounces. When he punched the wooden bars, the sturdy pillar should have broken from the middle, and then suddenly flew out and hit the bars on Freya's side with a loud bang. But within the range of the silence spell, one could only see the wood silently shattering, wood chips flying everywhere. 2 pieces of wood flew over and hit the other side, quietly bouncing off and bouncing twice when they fell. Brando walked out of the gap that was about the width of a person and then the Shire. He grabbed the iron chain on the opposite side of the bars, and with a casual tug, it deformed and then broke into pieces. He opened the door again, and the duration of the silence spell had just ended. What, do you want to stay a little longer? Brando stood at the door of the cell, looking at the 2 surprised girls and asked with a smile. You came out just like that? Freya couldn't believe what she had just seen. This was too lawless. Looking at Brando's skillful movements, it seemed like this wasn't the first time he had done something like this. Brando laughed. Those nobles really treated him like a nameless militia. What a joke. In the game he had escaped from prison at least 80, if not 100 times. Not to mention a small place like Fortress Reden. Even the port city of Ampere-Seal's Ironthorn stronghold had a successful escape. Players had always ignored the rules of NPCs, and in the past there was a strong player who escaped from the capital prison of Gruus, and it caused a sensation on the forums. He thought that if he stayed here until tomorrow morning, wouldn't he be letting down his former identity as a player? And who is he? Freya only just noticed that there was another person beside Brando. Respected ladies, I am the Lord Squire. The Shire lowered his head and bowed to the 2 girls. Squire? Lord? Roman and Freya almost couldn't control their voices. What was going on? Could it be that the dungeon is some kind of mysterious space? Why did he suddenly become a lord after staying there for a while, and even have a follower? Freya couldn't help but pat her face to make sure she wasn't dreaming. She couldn't help but think that if the young man who lived alone in the old mansion and disappeared for a few months was a lord, then wouldn't she be a goddess of war? Moreover, how did you come here? She couldn't help but ask. As you can see, I am a mage. The Shire replied calmly. This made Brando praise him. This guy's ability to bullshit was almost on par with his own. A wizard's apprentice. Freya sucked in a cold breath. You are a Highland Knight, Brando, so you are a Danian. She looked at Brando in disbelief. In this world, there was only one kind of mage that would appear as a squire of a knight. The Highland Knights of Karsuk had allied with the wizards for 300 years, forming the strongest military force in Erewhon, the White Knight Regiment. The Highland Knights and their mage squires were already well-known legends in Erewhon. At this moment, Freya had already determined that Brando was a noble young man born in a Highland Knight family. No wonder he is so powerful, no wonder he can be so calm, so he is a knight. She suddenly lowered her head, thinking that this hateful guy was obviously a noble, but why did he approach her in Roman? They were just two small commoners. Yes, he must be up to no good. She immediately put the blame on Brando for some of the bad habits of nobles that she heard from Aunt Sil, and then quietly shrank back. Brando obviously did not expect their future goddess of war to be so good at thinking. He thought she was too shocked to accept the fact. Actually, he had no choice since they thought it was easier to accept, and it also saved him the trouble of explaining. He could not help but shake his head and look at the Shire. Reality was so helpless. Very well, ladies. It's almost time, come out quickly. Brando looked at the Roman hiding in the dark, looking at him with bright eyes full of curiosity. He could not help but shake his head and said, "You don't really plan to stay in there until dawn, do you? Brando, are you really a knight?" The Roman suddenly asked. "No, I am Brando." He replied. "Then I will come out. Please, Tess. I will explode, don't worry, please vote." Chapter 55. When the three of them came out of the cell, they saw Brando easily taking care of the three patrolling guards. The whole process was done silently and skillfully. Freya suspected that Brando had undergone special training in the past, but why would a Highland Knight need such training? The dungeon under the barracks did not have many prisoners, and the security was very lax. Fortress Reedon had a dungeon that was used to lock up criminals, but the dungeon here was mainly used to lock up deserters and robbers. However, the military would usually execute these people on the spot, so the dungeon had not been used many times since it was built, and the wardens were only there to deal with it. However, the dungeon in the game was used to lock up players, and it was completely different from the dungeon here. It was overcrowded. If the White Mane Army had any other enemies in the game other than Madara, it would definitely be this dungeon. After taking care of the patrolling guards, the four of them went to the center of the dungeon. The guard who was in charge of the keys was shocked when he saw the four of them coming out from the darkness, and subconsciously pulled out his sword from the wall. However, Brando immediately raised his protective gloves and blocked the guard's sword with a layer of blue light. The blue light was about the size of a soccer ball, and there seemed to be a force pushing the sharp sword away. The White Mane Light Infantry was shocked, and the sword in his hand was taken away by Brando. Then the young man pushed him away, causing him to hit the wall, and he fainted with a groan. But to Brendel, they were just ordinary soldiers. He had the ability to kill them, but he did not kill them. He only knocked them out with one move. Freya saw that he had defeated the last enemy and could not help but say, "You are so powerful, Brando. If it wasn't for this trip, I would still be at the bottom of a well." "You are not bad, don't belittle yourself. White Swordsman is at the middle of the pack. You are more than qualified to enter the garrison." Brando found the key to the next floor from the guard and replied, "Swordsman by?" The Shire explained, "For a swordsman, iron, silver, and gold ranks correspond to the titles of a knight squire, official knight, and superior knight. As for an iron swordsman, Erewhon calls them knights reserve. If a nobleman has the slightest potential, he or she will be sent to a great noble family to become a squire. According to tradition, a swordsman of this rank has the right to not take off his hat when he sees a squire or a lord. However, this tradition was almost abandoned half a century ago. Below black iron swordsman there was no position. Generally speaking, the strength of your garrison and militia are all at this stage, but there are some differences." "I see." Freya was enlightened. Previously, her vision was still constrained by the number one swordsman in the militia, but now it was broadened. But Seal wasn't done yet. He seemed to have seen through his lord's intention to nurture this girl, so he continued, "A black iron swordsman represents the first level of strength, 3 to 20 OZ. A silver swordsman represents the second level of strength, 20 to 100 OZ. and a gold swordsman represents the third level of strength, 100 to 500 OZ. We wizards correspond to intermediate wizards, first circle wizards, and second circle wizards. Priests and other professions also have similar divisions. In fact, this division isn't based on a country or a family, but is strictly set by the Holy Cathedral of Fire. Freya and Roman could not help but blink. They did not know that there was so much logic behind this. However, these things weren't rare knowledge among the commoners, it was just that Butchie was too secluded. You must know that in those powerful empires such as Grus and Bonko, the soldiers of the standing army are at least black iron, and the captains are almost all silver swordsmen. But in Erewhon, even the frontline soldiers of the border army are not at the level of black iron swordsmen, and even the captains of the knight are only at the level of black iron. The Shire pointed out. The Shire, if word of this gets out, we will be beheaded. My lord, you are not afraid of being beheaded, so I, as a squire, am naturally not afraid. The young man cleverly replied, and he continued, my lord should be at the level of black iron swordsman, which is very rare for my lord's age. The Shire is very honored to be able to follow such an outstanding person. Brando thought to himself, not to mention the Reverend and the Chosen One, even those who were born with the talent of a knight were nothing. If his achievement was combined with the fact that he completed it in a few days, it would seem strange, but the Shire did not know this. However, it was still quite satisfying to have someone flatter him, and he was too lazy to expose them. Anyway, Roman and Freya's slightly surprised gazes made him feel quite proud, right? The Shire looked at the unconscious soldier on the ground, and asked in a low voice, there seem to be other prisoners in the 5th, 17th, and 22nd cells. Should we release them to help us escape, my lord? If it's a military camp outside, the more people there are, the higher the chance of success. Freya immediately glared at this guy. What kind of rotten idea was this? Didn't Brando say that the prisoners here were those who had committed the most heinous crimes? There's no need for that. Too many people will only affect my plans. Brendel replied confidently. As you wish. Brando turned his head again. Roman, do you know where your aunt is? Roman shook his head. I don't know, but I heard that she will be staying at a cousin's house? Where does that cousin live? I know, in the Ponowan market. I heard from my aunt that the person seems to be a distant relative of Roman's aunt, a small woolen merchant called Hood. Freya replied. Brando looked at Roman. Your family has a merchant's tradition. The merchant girl smiled sweetly in return. Since they had determined the place to go, the next step was easy. The first floor of the dungeon under the military camp was smaller, and there was only one warden. Brando confirmed that the 4 wardens on the next floor were temporarily added because of them. After dealing with this floor, they continued to go up and arrived at the interior of the military camp. Brando was very familiar with this place. First, he took Freya's half-plate of the Wind Empress from the temporary storage, then he looted a sword from each of the prisoners and equipped them. It was a pity that there was no experience in knocking out the soldiers, otherwise Brando wouldn't mind waking them up and knocking them out a few more times. The Shire had suggested more than once to stir up the prisoners so that they could escape during the riot. The reason was simple, it would be easy for them to deal with 1 or 2 Whitemane light infantry. But once they reached the courtyard outside, it would be difficult for the 4 of them to kill their way out. But Brando vetoed the idea. While they were talking, they had already sneaked into the top floor of the military camp. Brando opened the wooden door on the top floor of the tower and walked out. Outside was an open-air walkway with parapets on both sides for temporary defense. Brando didn't need to look to know that it was a tributary of the Song River in the city. From here he could see about 1/5 of the city. But he wasn't here to look at the scenery. Along the way they had knocked out 7 of the guards. According to the Whitemane Army's training, they would realize that something was amiss in about 10 minutes. Brando looked up at the sky. The moon was beautiful tonight, and even the thick clouds couldn't hide the silver disk in the night sky. What are you doing, Brando? Freya couldn't help but poke him from behind. She couldn't help but think that this guy didn't break out of prison just to see the moon. Although it was unlikely, but according to this guy's misdeeds, it wasn't impossible. She then looked at the Shire. The young man was also looking at the sky with his hands behind his back, not saying a word. The master and servant had a tacit understanding. The moon is beautiful tonight. Brando casually replied. You. Freya was so angry that she gritted her teeth. She really wanted to punch this guy's face and see if he could still smile. My aunt said that the moon's name is Luca. Luca was born because of Elaine. Elaine was Alice's sister, a twin goddess. Because of the moon, there are mysteries in this world. Roman looked up at the moon and said, "Your aunt knows a lot," the Shire replied. "This is a secret passed down among the wizards in this world. There is a book called The Epic of Darkness, and it describes the events that happened in the past." "You mean that Roman's aunt is a wizard?" Freya was stunned. "Not necessarily, she is related to magic. Some of the witches in the countryside also know about this," the Shire replied. The girl with a long ponytail couldn't help but look at Roman, who was staring at the moon as if he didn't hear these words. But Freya thought that Aunt Jenny was indeed a bit mysterious. She often brought back strange things from the outside. The villagers all said that she was a witch and didn't have much contact with her family. But as Brendel listened to the three of them, a strange thought appeared in his mind. That's right. 16. The tower. The lost moon took away the light. He was stunned for a moment, thinking that he was hallucinating. He quickly shook his head, but he couldn't help but think of the dream he had when he was unconscious that night. In a quiet and dark environment, everything in the dream seemed bizarre and variegated. However, there was only a black moon, a dark lake, and a tall tower that stood quietly in the middle of it all throughout the dream. After that, he met Freya. But just as he thought of this, he heard the merchant girl staring at the moon and saying, "Something is coming, Brando." The rest of the three people raised their heads. After waiting for about 20 seconds, everyone present heard the low sound of flapping wings from the sky. But Freya was confused and uneasy, while Brando and the Shire didn't panic, especially Brando. He raised his head. The next moment, the gargoyle opened its wings and jumped out from the clouds under the moonlight. The winged stone demon in the bright moonlight, above the clouds, formed a mysterious composition in the eyes of the three people. "Brando, that's your gargoyle." Roman recognized it immediately. "Yes, are you afraid of heights?" Romaine quickly shook her head. What do you want, Brando?" Freya thought of something and her face turned pale. When the Golden Apple Lord barged into Burnley's house with a gloomy face, the honorary aristocrat, who claimed to be a big workshop owner and an industrialist, was looking at an exquisite brass armor with a magnifying glass. After all, an armor of the Year of Glory style was priceless in the hands of any collector. Burnley slowly kept the magnifying glass in his hand and looked at his companion. He teased, "What's wrong? Did that guy bring people out of the city?" "It's not that serious. It's just that the prisoners escaped tonight." Escobar couldn't help but get angry when he mentioned this. Actually, he wasn't angry about this. He was angry about the madman who came to his house and shouted at him. "That's just a small matter. How did they escape?" "That's not what I'm angry about." The Golden Apple Lord shook his head and took a deep breath. "What I'm angry about is that the Tiger Luke Besson of the White Mane Army came to me and said that I locked up a descendant of a Highland Knight in his dungeon and that I was trying to cause trouble for him." "A Highland Knight?" Burnley was stunned. "Yes, he said that one of the three prisoners was a Highland Knight. Also, his mage squire was with him. Oh my God, he actually came to me to ask for that person. He said that I can't touch that person and that he must get him into his group." The Golden Apple Lord was furious at the mention of this. "And the result?" The result is that I have to bring people to settle this matter. It's the middle of the night, that guy is too much." He replied in a bad mood. "Don't be impulsive, let Grantham handle this matter. I'll get some people from my private army to help you." Burnley replied with a smile. The Golden Apple Lord looked at him gratefully. For the first time he didn't feel that the round face was so annoying. But he thought for a while and reminded, "Actually, I'm here for another matter. I heard that you recently shipped a batch of armor into the city. You have to be careful. Although it's not a big deal to cultivate your own forces, you have to be careful not to let others use it against you." He couldn't help but look into the house. "Just a hobby," the businessman replied with a smile. "P.S. Strange, why do I feel like my results are so bad?" Chapter 56. Brando and his squire dismounted from the gargoyle and saw Roman and Freya's pale face in the alley, especially the latter who was glaring at him hatefully. But he found it funny that the goddess of war was afraid of heights. When he thought of her pale face in the sky, she was no different from the girls in his previous team. All right, I'll explain the current situation. Brando was afraid that Freya would settle the score with him, so he spoke first. Freya saw through his trick and lightly snorted. She turned her head away, too lazy to argue with him. We have already delivered the news. Whether they accept it or not is up to the nobles. What we need to do now is to find Roman's aunt and escape from Fortress Reden before Madara attacks. But that won't be easy. Brando waved his hand and had the gargoyle fly up to the roof to observe the surroundings. He had been experimenting with talisman incantations since night fell, and finally found one that he could use. But he was still lacking an offensive incantation. Freya and Roman are registered militia, so your relatives in Fortress Reden must have a record. If we contact Roman's distant relative, we might run the risk of being discovered, especially when we don't know if the other party is reliable. Then won't Aunt Ginny be in danger? Freya turned her head and asked. Brando glanced at Roman. The latter didn't say a word and was playing with his clothes. Overall, the enemy has some time to react, but if we move like a swarm of bees, the chances of failure will be higher. To save time, we need to split into 3 groups and confirm what each of us should do. He took a deep breath and subconsciously brought out the demeanor of a team leader in the game. But in the real world, Brando couldn't help but feel a little nervous when he was in charge of other people's lives. His gaze paused on the 3 of them and he pointed out, Freya, contact Roman's relatives. Me. Freya pointed at herself in surprise. Yes, but I only know that he lives in Panuo Market. I don't even know the exact number. Besides, I don't even know where Panuan Market is. The ponytailed girl looked troubled. You can ask. The Panuan Market is nearby. There's a bar called Red Copper Dragon Story Club. After you walk out of this alley, you can go there and ask for information. Brando suddenly smiled. But be careful. The mercenaries in the bar have dirty hands and feet. Don't get taken advantage of. Freya's face flushed red, and she glared at him fiercely. You, shameless. The Shire chuckled at the side, thinking that his lord was quite interesting. It was rare for nobles to visit such a vulgar place like a bar, but it seemed like he was very familiar with the kingdom's affairs. Wizards always liked to hang out with smart people, especially those who were knowledgeable. Of course, this young man was no exception. After you find that woolen merchant called Hood, don't reveal your identity. Give him a time and ask him to meet us at the bar. You have to pay attention to his reaction and you will know if he is reliable. If you find traces of the army, don't worry. Before they know our relationship, they will not act rashly and alert the enemy. They will also want to have a chance to catch us all in one fell swoop. Freya thought for a while, as if to confirm if she could do it, and then nodded. What about me, Brando? Roman blinked and asked. Roman, help us contact a carriage and wait for us at the North Gate. There are only 2 hostels in Fortress Reden, so they might be monitored. If you find something wrong with one of them, change to the other. If there is something wrong with both of them, go to the North Gate alone. No matter what, we will leave when the gate opens at dawn. If we are lucky, we might be able to leave before the lockdown order is issued. Romain nodded straightforwardly. Then Brando took out the money he got from the noble's belongings and divided it into 2 portions. Both of you might need money for your actions. Here are 30 silver coins, half for each of you is more than enough. If possible, Roman, you can buy some food as well. Romain nodded seriously. What about you, Brando? Freya asked. You will be under a lot of pressure if you act alone. The White Mane Army might intervene at any time. The Shire and I will go visit a few old friends to attract the attention of the guards in Fortress Reden. Brando replied calmly. Only the heavens knew how much determination Brando put into this sentence. His belief was that he could control the risks, just like when he passed through Xavier's mountain pass. That was because he was confident that he could guarantee the safety of Roman and himself. He never thought of himself as a savior or a hero. Even a meticulous plan has the possibility of failure, not to mention the probability of success when you stake everything on a single throw. This sentence was given to Brando by his old leader in the game, and it was also his motto. But this time even he didn't know how big the risk was, but he had promised Roman and Butchie. As a man, sometimes he needed to be stubborn. Brando felt a kind of motivation that made his blood boil, supporting him to calm down and complete this task, to fulfill his promise. "You're crazy, Brando." Freya heard the hidden meaning in his words and stared at him with wide eyes. You will be hanged, what do you want us to do?" She suddenly felt that her words were ambiguous and explained with a red face. "What I mean is, I don't want to be a bandit with you." Brando suddenly felt that this girl who didn't mean what she said was a little cute. "It's okay," he said. "I will invite you to join us if there's a chance." He thought that there would be a chance, but how confident was he to convince the future goddess of war? "There's no chance," Freya said bitterly. "You and Roman should go together, I'm worried about her." "No need, I believe in the little Roman." Romaine raised her eyebrows, secretly happy. Freya was so angry that she gritted her teeth. She thought that this guy knew that she was worried about him, but he just had to force her to say it. What was even more infuriating was that even if she said it, he wouldn't listen. "Forget it, I'm too lazy to care about you." She lowered her head and used her hand to push her ponytail behind her back. You be careful." Romaine gave him a small everything is okay hand signal, and even waved it around. This was something she learned from Brando in the past 2 days. "I'll wait for you at the North Gate, Brando. The future merchant's carriage will only move once Brando is in it." Brando's heart skipped a beat when he heard this and smiled. About 10 minutes later in the White Main Army's barracks. "You said you didn't hear anything?" Luc Besson picked up a broken piece of wood and pointed at it. "From the degree of shattering, it's at least at the level of a first-rank warrior. A black steel swordsman broke through our White Main Army's prison, and you tell me you didn't hear anything?" Luc Besson, who was known as the Tiger, was 45 years old this year. His skin was dark and his forehead was sharp as if it was carved by a knife. His high cheekbones were half of the mountain people's bloodline. His cheeks were flat and skinny, and his deep eyes had a hint of wildness. Luc Besson had been promoted to the 104th Swordsman Regiment commander for 10 years. If he wanted to be promoted, he would have to rely on his reputation and experience in the army. However, Luc Besson was politically inclined towards the Everton faction, which was the so-called Revival Party. Furthermore, it was a fact that the White Main Army had already completed the process of privatizing Count Pulla, and he was no longer welcomed in the army. But this didn't stop him from showing off his authority in front of his subordinates. Tiger Luc Besson was not one of those nobles who got in through the back door. The general's words immediately made the few officers look at each other, especially the one who was on duty tonight. His face turned red. White Main infantrymen wearing randy uniforms and pointed helmets walked in and out of the room. Compared to the guards, the biggest difference in their uniforms was the white wolf feather hanging down from their epaulets. This unique ornament was to commemorate the glory of the White Main Army during the Battle of Jadens. It was also how the White Main Army got its name. If the opponent is a Highland knight, his acolytes would be able to do the same. Someone said, "To the White Main Army, the important thing isn't what your opponent did. The important thing is what you did. 10 minutes of reaction time. Are you a militia?" Luc Besson's reprimand made everyone speechless. At this moment, a military officer entered the room with his attendant. He held a sheepskin parchment in his hand and reported, "Commander, we have checked the information of the Bucci militia. There are indeed people named Freya and Roman in the records, but the young man named Brando doesn't seem to be from Bucci." Luc Besson was not surprised. He tapped the table with his finger and asked, "And then?" The attendant walked closer and whispered something in his ear. Luc Besson nodded. He asked again, "What is the attitude of the king's messenger?" The count did not say clearly, but it seems like he is hinting for us to execute him on the spot. The military officer replied. Luc Besson was slightly stunned. The king's messenger would go against a commoner? He rubbed his chin trying to decipher the hidden meaning, but before he could do that, the whole room was already buzzing with discussion. Is that so? But why would that old man go with a commoner? I think he is interested in those 2 women, that old pervert. A jester. I saw him admiring the elven sword with my own eyes. A country bumpkin who has never seen the world. Someone sneered. Luc Besson immediately slammed the table to stop the messy military officers. Just as he was about to reprimand them, another person pushed the door open. It was the messenger outside. Commander, the local parliament is on fire. What a good diversion. Luke Besson could not help but curse. He immediately stood up and ordered, I will give you 10 minutes to gather the 2nd and 3rd squadrons as soon as possible. Rows of military officers stood up. He then pointed to the other side. The two of you go and monitor the target. Makueline, your mission is the hostile. You know what to do, don't alert the enemy. The 3 people who were called out lowered their heads and did not dare to hesitate. They immediately turned around and left. Commander, what about Lord Cyber? No need to remind him. Those fellows must be running off to court the king's emissaries, and they must be on one side or the other, don't they? The commander's words made the room filled with low laughter. P.S. Chongqing has become a rural area. There is no electricity every day, and the electricity only came back at 7 today. Seeing so many people saying that 2 chapters a day is too slow, I have the urge to vomit blood. Please vote. Chapter 57. The Tale of the Red Copper Dragon was such a bar. Its door was on the main street between Ponoa Market and the Travelers' Bridge. It was open all night and catered to mercenaries, adventurers, prostitutes, and merchants who sold goods of unknown origin. If one could tolerate the messy atmosphere and vulgar slang, it was a good place to have fun. There was cheap ale, scantily clad waitresses, and enough food to fill one's stomach. One could drink all night and not spend a few copper coins. One could even whistle as much as one wanted without worrying about being thrown into the dungeon for a night. However, Freya could not help but tremble a little when she approached the bar. The country girl held her sword tightly with both hands and her mind was filled with the tips that Brando gave her. Her face was flushed red as she lowered her head and carefully walked through the crowd. She was so frightened that even her ponytail was drooping. Freya could not help but let her imagination run wild. What if someone suddenly molested her? Should she cut off his hand with her sword? Or should she stab him with her sword? She stole a glance at the scantily clad waitresses. Her ears were burning. How could this be? It was shameless. Freya held her sword with both hands and walked to the counter. The chubby bar owner looked at her from head to toe. This is not a place for you, little girl. Freya's face turned red. Only then did she realize that Brando was lying to her. She could not help but grit her teeth and clench her sword. However, she was too embarrassed to lose her temper in front of a stranger. But when she thought of her previous behavior, Freya could not help but lower her head. Well, I'm here to ask about a person. Reto looked at the girl in front of him. Her head was almost touching the bar. He could not help but laugh. A bar is a place to sell information. But little girl, we don't serve you for free. I know. I'll pay. Please tell me. Well, who do you want to ask about? Hood, the textile merchant from Bonoan Market. That guy, are you his relative from the countryside? Freya quickly shook her head. No, someone just asked me to send a letter to him. Reto shook his head, but at this time, a group of guards outside hurriedly passed by. He was keenly aware that the little girl in front of him had tensed imperceptibly. He had been a barkeeper for 10 years, and his observation of body language was second to none in the neighborhood. He smelled something unusual at once. But what was even more dramatic was that the guard actually turned back after passing by. He shouted from outside the door. Reto, by the way, did you see anyone suspicious? Reto lowered his head and saw that the girl was pretending to be calm in front of him, but she was so nervous that her fingers had turned white. He sighed and asked, They're looking for you, right? Freya was shocked and subconsciously pressed down on the hilt of her sword. Don't be nervous. It's just a professional habit. Freya was stunned. At this moment her thoughts flashed like lightning, and she unexpectedly said, I have money. Can you help me hide it? 100 Tor, do you have money? Reto smiled. He had a mix of good and bad people here, and it was common for him to hide a fugitive. Besides, he liked this little girl. 100 Tor was 1 silver coin, so Freya quickly nodded. When a few guards walked in from outside, Reto just happened to hide Freya in a wooden bucket behind the bar counter. None of the people in the bar had anything to do with the army, so naturally, no one stood out to identify them. Besides, each profession had its own rules. In a place like this where people from all walks of life mixed together, there were also rules that belonged to them. This was the so-called gray area. The guards in the city would come to the bar to inquire about information, and so would the illegal merchants and thieves. They all knew of each other's existence, but they abided by the rules and would not fall out with each other in person. This was the rule of the game. However, while Reto thought this way, the inexperienced Freya was different. As soon as she hid in the dark wooden bucket, she regretted it. She could not help but say to herself, "Freya, oh Freya, have you never thought that others would betray you? You really can't do anything well. Are you still the captain of the 3rd squad of Butchie's militia?" She heard the bar owner chatting with the guards outside, and the nervousness in her heart was indescribable. She was afraid that they would suddenly open the lid and drag her out. Although she said nothing, she knew what would happen to her if she was caught. But after a while, she heard someone knocking on the door outside. The voice said, "They've already left. Come out." Freya opened the wooden bucket a little and saw that there was no one outside. She could not help but breathe a sigh of relief, but she saw that everyone in the bar was looking at her with a smile. Some people even raised their glasses to toast her. Good, a little girl dares to go against those guys from the army. Come, cheers. Freya could not help but blush. She said to the bar owner, "Thank you. There's no need to thank me. I'll charge you a total of 110 tor," the chubby owner said with a smile. He waved his hand and summoned a dark-skinned girl in a simple leather skirt. She had long braided hair and was wearing a simple leather skirt. "This is my daughter. Let her take you to Hood's house. By the way, little girl, let me give you a piece of advice. Don't run around alone at this time of night. Where are your companions?" Freya could not help but think of Brando. She wanted to be angry, but she could not bring herself to do so. She thought that Brendel had the intention of letting her come out to train herself, but when she thought about her previous performance, she felt nothing but shame. She could not help but tighten her grip on her sword. "I'm Sue." The girl looked at her and stretched out her hand. "I occasionally help my father look after this bar, but I'm free now, come with me." "Thank you, I'm Freya." Asterisk 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 asterisk. "Someone is trying to fish in troubled waters, my lord." The Shire stared at the tall building in the distance and replied. Brendel frowned. He did not expect there to be another faction in the city that did not belong to the two factions. The fire in the House of Nobles did not help him. Instead, it caused him a lot of trouble. But the timing was not bad. He thought for a moment. The other party should at least be an insider, or at least know that they have escaped. He thought back to the situation at that time. Perhaps it was one of the nobles. But who was it? What was the other party's goal? Brendel shook his head and threw these thoughts out of his mind. Even though he was a little unhappy about being used, he did not have the right to be unhappy about it as an insignificant person. "I hope it won't cause too much trouble," he said. "But we don't need to be affected. It's good that someone is helping us. We just have to do our own things." "But you haven't answered me yet. What are we going to do, my lord?" The Shire asked. "Someone lent me a sword. Of course I'm going to get it back." Brando knew that King Oberg VII was not a generous person, but he did not know how close the so-called king's vassal was. "Who? A count?" The Shire snorted. "I've never seen anyone more lawless than you, my lord. Do you really think the noose is not hard enough for your neck? We are going to be hanged after escaping from the dungeon. If that's the case, why would we care if there is 1 or 2 nooses around our necks?" Brando could not help but laugh. To be honest, he was also very nervous. But he found that his squire was quite a humorous person. "That's true. But what do you plan to do, my lord?" "Attack from the front. Of course, the more noise the better." The Shire could not help but look at Brando. Although he was talking and laughing freely, his pale face and pale hands revealed his nervousness. Even so, the other party was still calm and composed as he laid out his plan. "What will happen if you die?" Brando thought for a moment and asked. "Cards that die on the battlefield will naturally enter the graveyard. Before my lord has a way to get me out, I will stay there." The Shire replied. "If that's the case, then I'll have to be careful," Brando said as he calculated the time in his mind. After calculating the time he had, he raised his right hand for the gargoyle to grab. The Shire raised his hand as well. The two of them looked at each other and nodded. The gargoyle quickly soared into the sky. Under the cover of the night, it flew towards a small forest on top of a hill in Fortress Reden. The wind whistled in their ears. The Shire could not help but ask, "My lord, are you sure that a count will temporarily stay in a forest like this? And not the castle behind you?" He was referring to the place where the Pine River and Wuxia River intersected, the castle in the middle of the river. "What did you say? The wind is too strong, I can't hear you?" "I mean, my lord, are you flying in the wrong direction?" "Me? Of course not. Did I say that I'm going to look for trouble with the count?" "Then what are we going to do?" "Of course we're going to level up. If you want to do a good job, you must first sharpen your tools, understand?" "Level up? Is this some kind of ancient language?" "Nonsense. Let me tell you. In a game there are 3 indicators that will always exist. They are skills, equipment, and stats." Brando shouted in the wind. "When you look at these 3 indicators, there will always be one that can help you. If you become a great wizard one day, you must thank me for telling you this secret. Game. Life is like a game and a game is like life. Understand?" "I barely understand. My lord, you're really unfathomable," the Shire said, but he did not know that flying in the air at night was so cold that his hands and feet were almost frozen. Brando stared at the forest, thinking that he had at most 15 minutes. Inside Yusong Castle, the middle-aged man sat on the sofa and looked carefully for a long time, then put down the leaf-shaped sword in his hand. His expression did not change. He still had his cold expression, but the coldness in his eyes became more obvious. "What do you think?" the figure behind him asked. "This should be the sword. I don't know how that young man got it. But no matter what, he must disappear from this world. But the 2 women beside him are not bad, I like them. A little love won't hurt the big picture, but it's important not to delay the main business. If I don't give them a hint, those short-sighted fools will not think of using my name to do things. However, since they were the ones who killed him, it doesn't matter if we try to curry favor or flatter them, no one will suspect us. We just need to make everything look reasonable. As for personal reputation, when do we care about that?" The middle-aged man's thin lips curled into a cold smile. "You said it yourself, a little love won't hurt the big picture." The figure smiled and looked back at the sword. "Do you see any clues?" The middle-aged man shook his head. "It's not that easy." Chapter 58. Brando let go of the gargoyle's claws, and he and the Shire landed on the soft meadow. In the quiet woods on the top of the hill, they saw a crooked wooden house. It looked like a slum house 2 stories high, and the dim light of a candle shone through the gaps between the wooden boards. "My lord, is this the level-up place you were talking about?" The Shire loosened his sore wrist and carefully looked at the house in front of him. He had a serious look of suspicion on his face. "I don't want to question you, my lord, but why does it look more like the place where the witches of Bunasan live?" "You're right, this is the residence of a witch." "Oh, the witches do have some ways to temporarily increase their power." "No, temporary power is too weak." "Then, my lord, your goal is the art of necromancy?" "The art of necromancy is indeed an emergency solution. But my lord, the evil spirits of the lower world are not easy to deal with. I do have a few ways to deceive them, but I haven't tried it myself." Brando walked towards the wooden house, and the young man followed closely behind him. "The Shire, remember to tell me next time, but this time we are here to do business." "Business?" Brando had already walked to the door. He stopped, tensed his body, and slowly adjusted his breathing. Only he knew that the witch named Babasha who lived here was just a cover. When the nobles designed the family castle, they would often leave a secret passage for emergency use. The original owner of Yusong Castle, the Duke of Grimoires, was a conservative diehard who made many political enemies. The passage in the castle avoided the densely populated areas and went all the way to this hill. And Babasha, as the Duke of Grimoires' wizard advisor, guarded the exit of the secret passage, for the Lord was a matter of course. This secret was discovered by the players in the Second War of the Black Rose. After the repeated tug-of-war with Madara failed to conquer Yusong Castle, they found the castle's blueprint. Brando was also very familiar with this level 32 witch called Babasha. When Brando was leveling up in Fortress Reeton, this was the only shop that sold mysterious items. At that time he didn't have much experience in the game and liked to bet on his luck. In the end, he lost a lot of his hard-earned money to this old witch. However, this was not the main point. The main point was how to subdue this first ring magus so that he could carry out his next plan. One of his hands was still on the hilt of his sword, and his fingers were cold because of his nervousness. He hesitated for a moment, then bent his finger and knocked 3 times on the 70-degree slanted wooden board with 2 slits, one long and one short. Soon a shrill and old voice came from the second floor. "Who is it? If you want a divination, come back in the morning." "I'm not a diviner. I've brought something. You want to do business. Do you know the rules?" The voice from upstairs paused and asked, "I have what you need, witch." "Really? You'd better take out what I want, or I'll dig out your heart and throw it to my dog." The shrill voice came from the second floor to the first floor, followed by the sound of someone going down the stairs. The door opened quickly, revealing an ugly old face. The witch looked at him with her turbid eyes under the hood for a moment, then said, "If you have something to say, say it quickly." Brando didn't even think, and with a whoosh, he pulled out his sword and placed it on her neck. His move was out of everyone's expectations. Even Charles, who was at the side, was shocked. Who would do business like this? When he pulled out his sword, his whole body was like a tightened bowstring, so much so that after he succeeded, his whole body felt weak. He exhaled, and the hand holding the sword trembled. If Babash's reaction was a fraction of a second faster, she would have more than 10 ways to turn him into ashes with a single spell. But it was really fortunate that this old witch was used to being pampered. With the strength of a first-ring wizard, she didn't put a low-ranked dark iron swordsman in her eyes. Perhaps Babasha still thought that even with the long sword on her body, she still had a chance, but for Brando, the outcome of the battle had been decided at this moment. The Shire was also shocked. He thought that escaping from prison or finding trouble with an earl was child's play compared to this moment. As soon as Babasha opened the door, he found out that she was a first-ring wizard. Martha above, a high-ranking wizard like her could beat 10 of him with one slap. But his lord didn't say anything and put his sword on her neck first. "Young man, what do you want to do?" Babasha's face was cold, and she asked sharply. "Before your left little finger completes the movement of the 3rd section, my sword will pierce your heart. I heard from the witches that the heart is the source of a person's life, and corresponds to the magic triangle. I've always wanted to see if this is true." Brando replied coldly, "Of course, if I were you, I would stop this stupid behavior immediately." As soon as he said this, Babasha and the Shire's faces immediately changed dramatically. The Shire thought that this old witch was casting a spell, and he didn't see it at all. It must be a very advanced spell technique, but how did his lord recognize it? Babasha was even more shocked. A swordsman without a trace of magic waves recognized her spell technique at a glance, and accurately called out which section of the spell she was in. Was the world upside down? "What do you want to do?" Under the shock of her heart, her attitude softened and she asked. "Duke Grinoires doesn't seem to have any friends in the capital. Presumably, the reason why he lent Pine Castle to the Earl is because the other party is His Majesty's close vassal. In that case, why should you die for a stranger?" Although Brando said it with confidence, the hand holding the sword was trembling slightly. He always paid attention to Babash's every move and look, for fear that the other party would play tricks. Originally, a level 3 or 40 wizard should have no secrets in his eyes, but his perception attribute was too low, and he could only guess. Brendel felt that it was a competition to see who was more daring. Babash's face changed again. "What did you say?" "My request is very simple. I want you to swear by your natal star that you will lend me the secret passage of Pine Castle once. Only once, and I won't tell anyone." The old witch looked at Brando as if he was a monster. She was the only one who knew about the secret passage of Pine Castle other than the Duke of Grinoires. Even the Duke's personal attendants and family members didn't know. How did this young man know? Was he the illegitimate son of the Duke of Grinoires? "I said no. I don't want to kill anyone." Only then did Babasha realize that she had no room to negotiate the price. She thought for a moment and had to admit defeat. Trembling, she reached out to the Witch King's constellation and was ready to swear. But Brando shook his head. "Babasha, isn't your natal star Hydra?" The witch shuddered. How did he know? She couldn't help but look at the other's dark eyes, as if all her secrets were exposed under the other's sharp eyes. Her natal star was the biggest secret of a witch, and she only gave it to the Duke of Grenoir's to gain the other's trust. Babasha felt more and more that Brando was mysterious, so she didn't dare to play tricks anymore. She honestly pointed to her natal star and swore a poison oath. Brando breathed a sigh of relief, only to feel that his back was completely soaked in sweat. He put down his sword and said to the Shire, "The Shire, go to the back shelf and take the scrolls on the right of the first row, and the box in the middle of the second row, and the 3 reagent bottles on the left of the third row. Everything else, don't touch them." The Shire had already admired his lord. Before in the sky he flattered Brando that he was enigmatic, but now he really felt that the lord was a bit enigmatic. At this moment Babasha felt that she had fallen into a bottomless abyss. The young man didn't even look at the things on the shelf that were really useful, and which were full of vicious curses. After all, those things were secrets that only she knew. But the Shire cried out in surprise when he opened the box. "These are elemental crystals. My lord, you can use them directly if you take some time to absorb them." But Brando shook his head, walked over and picked up the 3 gray reagent bottles at the bottom and asked, "Do you know what these are?" Babasha also raised her head in confusion. Even the old witch herself did not know what was in the 3 reagent bottles. It was just that at her level, she could instinctively feel the magical ripples emanating from some items, so she kept them. After years, a thick layer of dust had accumulated on them. Originally, reagents couldn't be used casually. Not only could poison people to death, but the wrong way of using buff potions could also cause people to die. Magic was a powerful, mysterious, and dangerous thing. The Shire looked at it and shook his head. "This is mana potion, how can you not even recognize this?" Brando wiped the dust on the bottle with a little dissatisfaction, revealing the light blue liquid below. "Impossible." Babasha and the Shire were shocked. "Why are you so surprised? Isn't it just a mana potion?" "I want to ask you now, these 3 bottles of mana potion can increase your mana by 4 times. And regardless of the change in magic power, what level of wizard do you think you are equivalent to with 4 times your mana?" "Intermediate wizard." The Shire replied dryly. "So, these are the 3 indicators I told you about. 3 bottles of mana potion. Before you finish using them, you will be an intermediate wizard. And in fact, you are still just an apprentice now, understand?" The Shire nodded subconsciously. But that was mana potion, known as the gold of wizards. This thing was a product born out of advanced alchemy, and it was no easier to produce than holy water. He himself had only seen it in parchment scrolls, and it was just thrown to him so casually. Brando picked up the long parchment scroll on the top of the shelf again. This is the scroll that records the mystery of how the ascetics compress the air on both sides of their swords to make them sharp. Skills are part of attributes. These are the 3 indicators. Now do you understand what I mean when I say to improve yourself here? Learning a skill is not something that can be done overnight. What's the use of sharpening your spear before the battle, Lord? The Shire immediately said. But he saw Brando opening the scroll and sweeping it, then casually throwing it away. The scroll fell to the ground with a hollow sound, and the Shire stood there in a daze for about a few seconds. Then he suddenly swung his sword towards the door of the wooden house, and with a crack sound the door frame, which was 3 to 5 feet away, broke outwards, and the door split into 2 pieces and floated outwards for more than 10 meters before falling to the ground. The Shire's jaw dropped, and his jaw almost fell to the ground. Brando also frowned just to learn this skill. He had used 153 points of skill experience. This was not a cross-profession skill, and the consumption of intermediate skill was too ridiculous. The forum said that this skill needed to be upgraded to at least level 25, so the amount of experience required was ridiculous. But in his opinion it was still worth it. After all, he had learned more than 10 intermediate skills in his previous life, and half of them were skills that came with the profession. This scroll was probably the closest intermediate skill to him in the early stages of the game, but unfortunately, he missed it because of a little luck factor. So, whether he was going to carry out the next plan or not, at least the skill on this scroll must be obtained. Now it was just on the way. He put down his sword, turned back to Babasha and said, "I'll borrow these things of yours, is it okay?" It was more like robbing than borrowing. But this old witch was not a good thing, so he had less psychological burden. But Brando just asked casually, and did not expect Babasha to kneel down with a plop, lowering her head deeply and touching the ground with her forehead. The dark prophecy says that only the dark dragon can see through all the secrets of the witches, and any means are just tricks in front of you. You see through people's hearts and understand all things. Ancestors of the Myrna, so you have returned. This time it was Brando and the Shire's turn to be stunned. P.S. Christmas Eve, are you eating instant noodles or fried rice? Chapter 59. The Dragon of Darkness was the mortal enemy of the four saints in the Holy War, especially the Flame King Gretel, who had a grudge against the Dragon of Darkness. Although Brando was also puzzled as to why Babasha would say that, he could not agree this time. Otherwise, he would accidentally stand on the opposite side of the entire world of light. The Dragon of Darkness, Odin? I know that you witches see him as the guide of a dark destiny, but it has nothing to do with me. He looked at Babasha, but saw that the old witch was still kneeling on the ground in fear and trepidation, her whole body trembling. Brando was slightly startled and realized that he had gone too far. He had forgotten that the people of this world had great respect for the gods and the existence of great power. Even if they stood on the opposite side, they would not casually disrespect them verbally. As a player, he could not accept it all, and the remaining half was still due to Brando's influence. Therefore, when these names were mentioned, they naturally showed an expression of equality. This kind of equality was nothing to him, but in the eyes of the Shire and Babasha, it was a great disrespect. But the situation was a little different now. The old witch Babasha was in a deep panic, and the Shire had not come out of his previous worship. So this kind of natural behavior left more doubts in their hearts. Brando also realized this. He shook his head and said, "Forget it. Think what you will. As long as you don't interfere with me, you are not allowed to go anywhere until the sun rises." Babasha pressed her forehead against the ground, and as expected, she did not dare to move. Brando gestured to the Shire, who was in a daze, telling him that there was a secret door under the table and for him to open it. The young man moved the table suspiciously, lifted the carpet and pressed it with his hand. Sure enough, there was only a thin layer under it. The Shire was a little used to his lord's foresight at this time, and could only conclude that there were still some things in this world that could not be found with human power. He found the handle on the side and pulled it open, revealing a dark and steep staircase below. "My lord, are we going in now?" he asked. "Of course, what else do you want?" Isn't there any other place in Fortress Reden that I can level up? Do you think magic items are cabbages that you can pick up whenever you want?" "Cabbage? I mean Tao Wu, you know that thing, right?" Brando slapped his forehead and realized that he had misspoken again. Wond was still a little different from the world he was familiar with. "Of course, but after hearing it from you, my lord, it's different." Dabai Kai, what a poetic and picturesque word. Presumably, its root must have come from the ancient language. Look at the pronunciation, it's similar. Brando couldn't help but laugh. However, there were at least two other places in Fortress Reden that had hidden side quests and benefits. The underground church and the famous Tower of Wind, but these two places had a level restriction similar to that of a door god. Moreover, it wasn't an NPC like Babasha, so he gave up after much consideration. His biggest dream now was to temper his strength while collecting all the treasures he knew of. However, he didn't have much time left. His current goal was to become a survivor, not a statistic. Once the First War of the Black Rose ended, before Erwin's Civil War, Brando would have plenty of time to carry out his plan. With experience and the best equipment, becoming one of the strongest in Wond wasn't impossible. Brendel never believed that a strong person did not need to rely on equipment. As a player, the combination of attributes, equipment, and skills was essential to him. He picked up a box and swept all the elemental crystals into his pouch. 12 wind elemental crystals, 1 fire elemental crystal, and only 2 or 3 blue water elemental crystals. These elemental crystals were also known as elemental crystals. They were the condensation of free elements in the material world. They were supposed to be irregular prismatic crystals, but because they needed to be manually polished into pointed prismatic equivalents, each of them contained an energy of 1. After looting Babasha's collection, the two acted like the most competent robbers. They also took Babasha's candle and walked into the tunnel. A witch's candle was a magic item. It could teleport people to places where light could reach. This was a secret that only witches knew. Of course, Brando also knew about it. The secret tunnel in Castle Urson was about 1. 5 kilometers long. Most of it was narrow and could only fit one person. In a slightly wider area, there were 3 poisonous spiders the size of humans. Wizards often did this kind of thing, raising servant beasts to act as their guards. Babasha obviously put them here to please the Duke of Grimoires. But these things could only scare ordinary people. For Brando, 3 of them were worth 90 XP. The other end of the tunnel led to the cellar of Castle Urson behind a row of wine racks. But since it was an escape tunnel, it was naturally not sealed. Brando felt around the wall and found the mechanism. It was used to move the racks to one side. When the 2 came out of the tunnel, they both let out a long sigh. No matter how good the ventilation was, the smell of dust accumulated in the narrow tunnel was not something that ordinary people could tolerate. After walking for a long time, the Shire almost thought that his lungs were covered with a thick layer of dust. As soon as he came out of the tunnel, he immediately took out a silver pocket watch and glanced at it. 15 minutes has passed, my lord. It's okay. I originally reserved time to go to the Duke's treasury, but it seems that I have to give up. But most of the nobles' collections in the villas are just some art and jewelry. It's not much use. My lord is really decisive. Not everyone can stay calm in front of treasure. No, you misunderstood the Shire. I mean, just take 2 pieces on the way. I'll tell you which ones are authentic later. The Shire was surprised by his lord's greed. But he did not know that Brando's banditry did not originate from his personality. It was a subconscious behavior as a player. The 2 of them walked up the stairs and stopped talking at the same time. Brando extinguished the candle and handed it to the squire behind him. He put his hand on the doorknob of the cellar and activated his power. The doorknob cracked. He immediately pushed the door open. The 2 guards looked at him in shock, but they only saw that Brando's other hand had already pulled out a long sword. The sword drew a beautiful silver arc forward. The 2 guards were only halfway through the action of pulling out their swords when the sword in their hands was knocked out together with the scabbard. They were shocked and realized that they did not come with good intentions. They wanted to escape, but how could Brando let them go? Without hesitation, he chased after them and ended their lives. This was Brando's first time killing someone. He did not think about anything when he killed the 2 guards. His mind was not even blank. He felt that he was calmer than usual at that moment. Because if the other party did not die, he and the Shire would be in a situation of certain death. This was a battle of life and death. He did not even think about what would happen to the Roman or Freya. His survival instinct alone was enough to make him do it. But after killing, Brando felt a huge sense of suffocation. He tried to calm his breathing and stood there motionlessly with the long sword in his hand. He let the blood drip down the blade and fall on the stone floor. There was no reaction at all. At that moment he thought of a lot of things. A lot of miscellaneous things drilled into his mind, but it made his mind appear to be in a state of vacuum. He almost lost his mind for a moment. At first he wanted to find an excuse, but then he just wanted to comfort himself and make himself feel a little more at ease. My lord? The Shire saw his abnormality. Brando raised his hand to indicate that it was okay. He wanted to drag the 2 corpses into the cellar and hide them, but now he was not in the mood. He could do not look at them. It was not that he was afraid of killing people, but he could not accept the impact for a while. But what made him feel a little relieved was that there was no experience in killing people. He did not know why he felt comforted by this. He should be in urgent need of experience, but Brando thought that if he could get experience by killing people, he might not be able to accept it. He thought for a while and felt that he was still a human. He could not accept the fact that he used the lives of his own kind for profit. Now we will split up. Brando took a deep breath and replied, "Just tell me what to do. I will kill my way up to find trouble with the Earl. You will sound the alarm from the other side," Brando said as he counted from 1 to 100. When he counted to 30, he finally calmed down. "Sound the alarm? Did you forget what I told you? We have to attack from the front. The bigger the commotion, the better. Then we will go back the way we came from and retreat through the secret passage? No, we have to kill our way out." The Shire was shocked. "Why? The guest rooms are at the top of the castle. We only have time to escape from the top of the tower. But if the White Mane army still brings archers, you and I will have to pray for Lady Martha's protection. The Shire nodded and turned to leave. He did not ask where the alarm was. If he did not even know how to scratch his tongue, he did not need to be a squire. A knight and their squire should have basic combat skills. But Brando took the initiative to stop him. Wait, why are you in such a hurry? What's wrong, my lord? Do you have any other orders? Of course, go up the stairs from here and turn left. There is a corridor at the end of the stairs. If you see something that is easy to carry and sell, don't hesitate to take it. The Shire stared at him for a while and finally said, I take back what I said before, my lord. What sentence? The first sentence. Not everyone can remain unmoved in front of treasures. It should be changed to indeed. No one can remain unmoved in front of treasures. No, you don't understand. Look at the Shire. In the future, I will have to take care of the little Roman and her aunt. This is the responsibility of a man. It is not easy to support a family. I have my own difficulties. You should leave those words to the Duke of Grenoires. My lord, don't worry, I have studied appraisal in Buga. I will help you pick out the most valuable items. Brando was stunned for a moment and then laughed evilly. P.S. I had fried rice for dinner and instant noodles for supper. But why do I feel a little disgusted after eating instant noodles? Chapter 60. Since Brando did not deliberately hide himself, he was discovered by the guards when he passed through the first floor of the courtyard. After he killed 3 of them, the 7-man patrol squad scattered in all directions and spread the news of the intruder to every corner of the castle. There were 32 guards in the castle, and most of them were mercenaries. Their captain was the leader of the mercenaries from Ranner. Not only did he possess the strength of an iron-ranked swordsman, but he was also a commander. That was why he was ambushed when he entered the second floor of the banquet hall. There were 11 guards involved in this ambush. When he pushed open the door, the hall was brightly lit. The archers who were lying in ambush in the corridor above immediately took action and shot arrows at Brendel. At such a close distance, Brando only had time to raise his hands to protect his face, chest, and lower abdomen. The blue light on his protective gloves flashed slightly, and the most accurate arrows were pushed aside by the expanding light. Of course, there were still a few arrows that brushed past his arms and thighs. Brando gritted his teeth and cursed in his heart. His 4-ounce physique was equivalent to his muscles, and it would automatically reduce the damage that would cause serious injuries to normal damage. The original superficial wounds would become abrasions, and the lighter weapons would not even be able to cut through his skin. Even so, the pain did not lessen at all. If it was under normal circumstances, Brando would have retreated and taken a detour to the spiral staircase on the second floor, knowing that there was a large number of guards lying in ambush on the second floor. Even though there would be guards at the spiral staircase on the inner side of the castle, the terrain there would not be so dangerous. But it was different now. He swung his sword diagonally upwards, and a transparent ripple passed through his blade and spread across half of the hall. With a loud crash, the candlesticks and utensils on the long dining table in the hall fell to the ground along with the ripple. The chandelier on the ceiling exploded, and the railings on the corridor were split in half. The guards on the railings were beheaded and fell to the ground. The White Raven sword style was Erwin's royal sword style. This secret skill was one of the rare ranged skills that warriors could learn in the early to middle stages. At level 0, the blade of the White Raven sword style would be able to travel 5 to 6 meters away from the sword and double the width of the attack. At level 25, this swordsmanship could attack enemies hundreds of meters away. It was almost on par with swordsmen who had activated elemental power. It only consumed 3 points of stamina from the beginning to the end, which was nothing compared to the huge consumption of elemental power. This was also the reason why so many people were so eager to learn intermediate skills. Brando's shocking strike actually caused a moment of silence in the hall. It wasn't until the sound of broken wood falling from the second floor of the hall that everyone woke up from their stupor. Knight! Knight of the Temple! In the name of Martha! Mr. Arno, let's retreat! The guards screamed, losing their will to resist and retreating. Sword aura projection was one of the basic skills of a warrior who had activated his elemental power. According to tradition, the Holy Cathedral of Fire would confer the title of knight to these people. In order to distinguish between knights of different countries, they were also known as Knights of the Holy Cathedral. In front of a knight, a level 3 strength system was nothing, let alone ordinary people like them. Unless they could exhaust the opponent's stamina, it would be futile no matter how many of them there were. Knight my ass. Captain Arno pulled back the man closest to him. He couldn't help but curse in his heart. That was definitely a royal swordsman. Could it be that they were involved in a palace struggle? As the leader of the mercenaries, he was naturally more knowledgeable. He even knew that the noble upstairs was a vassal. It wasn't the first time he was involved in a political struggle, but it was the first time he saw the legendary royal swordsman. That was the highest level of royal swordsmanship, one of the core powers of the royal family. For a mere lower-level iron swordsman to be able to explode with such power, Arno couldn't help but feel a little jealous. But as a mercenary, he still remembered his duty. He raised his head and looked around. Most of the guards had already fled, and the rest were not fearless. They were too scared to move. Brando's sword had killed 4 people. Arno didn't have time to feel heartache. He stood up and shouted, "Retreat! Retreat! Tell the people on the spiral staircase to retreat. This floor can't be defended. We'll go up to the next floor." The remaining guards came to their senses and immediately retreated from all the doors. Some were so scared that they didn't even want their bows and arrows. They were just short of taking off their armor and throwing it away. This scene made Arno disheartened. Damn it, these nobles are so troublesome. He cursed. Then he turned around and lifted the guard from the ground. Pa, he slapped the guard twice to wake him up from his fear. He said angrily, "Go to the barracks in the castle and sound the alarm. Do you understand?" Sound the alarm? But didn't the Duke say that it's to warn the whole city? The guard was stunned. Bullshit. If the guest dies, we're all dead. Do you understand? The guard was stunned and quickly nodded. It had to be said that this attendant was quite clever. He was afraid that the other party had other accomplices, so he didn't dare to take the inner spiral staircase. Instead, he secretly climbed down the kitchen rope. Although it took some time, at least in his opinion, it was absolutely safe. He knew that Arno had placed his hopes on the barracks on the other side of the castle. There was a small group of white-maned soldiers stationed there to support the guards in the castle. There were a total of 7 of them, including a division leader. Although they usually looked down on each other, they hoped to see each other soon. But before the attendant could run over, he was shocked to find the corpses of 2 sentinels in dark blue military uniforms lying in the middle of the courtyard. He immediately realized that the sentinels had accomplices. The bodyguard reacted quickly, and almost immediately turned around and left. But it was too late. A white light shot out from the 2nd floor of the barracks and pierced through the guard's chest. The magic arrow's powerful force sent the guard's corpse flying 7 to 8 meters, and it crashed into a pine tree. The Shire stood by the stone window and looked outside for a long time. After confirming that the guard was dead and that there were no accomplices, he retracted his gaze. He took out his pocket watch and looked at the rope dangling from the clock tower. There were still 5 minutes before Brando's meeting time. Arno did not know that the person he sent to deliver the message had been killed. Even the small group of white-maned soldiers that he was counting on had been wiped out. He was now hoping that his remaining men could hold on until the reinforcements arrived. They were guarding the staircase from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor. Behind them was the guest room and they had nowhere to go. Although he usually looked down on them, he was now envious of the servants. At least they could find a place to hide. But he, as the guard leader, could not. If the Count died under his protection, he would probably have to change his name and escape to the mountains to become a bandit. The young swordsman quickly appeared in his vision. Brando estimated the time. There were only a few minutes left. However, he shook off the blood foam on his sword, thinking that it should be enough. But when he looked at the defensive line formed by more than 10 guards in front of him, he couldn't help but feel a little strange. Were these guys really that weak? He thought that it would be a tough battle. He could also see that the guard leader was at least an average black iron swordsman. Logically speaking, he should have the upper hand. But Brando was wrong about one thing. It was the advantage of having skills. He thought that since he could obtain skills from the first 5 levels, the others should be able to do the same. But Brando was used to dealing with players and forgot that this was a privilege that only players had. Most of the guards here were militia members before they joined the mercenaries. They had learned some crude swordsmanship, and the rest of their experience was gained through actual battles. Just like Arno, he came from the military and learned Erwin's military swordsmanship. Other than that, he did not know anything else. Of course, even if he knew this, he would not be merciful. He knew that the guest he was protecting meant a lot to these people. Thus both sides had no choice. The guards drew their bows and shot arrows. Brando raised his protective gloves and deflected the arrows. But in fact, he only needed to block Arno's arrow because the arrows of the others were no threat to him. First team attack. Seeing that the arrows were ineffective and the enemy was getting closer, Arno could only brace himself and lead his men forward. He organized 7 men and they cursed the enemy for being shameless. Why didn't they go first? But they thought that they would definitely die this time. But when they rushed out, they felt a shadow pass by them. They subconsciously turned around and were surprised to find that the Grim Reaper had bypassed them and was in front of their captain. When Arno saw Brando's figure disappear from his sight, he knew that things were not good. He had fought with the Sun Knight before and knew that the Kingdom's Knights had a skill called Charge which could instantly increase their speed. He felt his scalp tingle. Countless battle experience forced him to raise his sword and block. Clang! Sparks flew as the 2 swords clashed. As expected of an average iron-ranked player, Brando thought to himself, Arno's sword came without any warning. If he was in the game, he would be an extremely experienced swordsman. He remembered that he had suffered a great loss when he was around level 20 because of NPCs who climbed up in battle. But that was then and this was now. Brendel did not give his opponent a chance to catch his breath and swung his sword at him again. This time it was a burst of strength. Arno was scared out of his wits. He could not help but wonder who this kid was. He knew court swordsmanship, knight skills, and the burst of strength of a berserker. Was there any justice in this world? Even with his vast experience, he could not help but feel a chill in his heart. Fortunately, he was knowledgeable. If it was someone else, they would have died without knowing why. Arno wanted to counterattack, but when he saw this sword, he lost all thoughts and went into a defensive stance. After the swords clashed, both of their swords were bent to the limit and let out a teeth-numbing screech. Brando was still fine after that, but the guard captain took 7 steps back and almost fell on his butt. Arno's iron-ranked strength should have exceeded 9 ounces and should have suppressed Brando. But now the situation was the opposite. This was the power of a skill. When Arno retreated, the guards on the left and right came to their senses and wanted to attack. But Brendel casually swung his sword behind him, and a wind blade flew out, sending the man's head flying. He then moved forward. Arno saw this and decisively threw his sword away and shouted, "I surrender!" Just as he finished speaking, the alarm bell outside rang. "If you surrender, throw down your weapons and scram," Brando growled. The guards felt as if they had been pardoned. They threw away their weapons and fled. They were already scared out of their wits, and now that their captain had agreed to surrender, they naturally lost their will to fight. P.S. Sorry I went out for dinner today and was a bit late. Chapter 61. The brass alarm bell of Pine Castle was hung on the tall tower. When it was rung, the sound of the bell could be heard throughout half of the city. The sound of the bell was like an invisible ripple that spread throughout the city. Everywhere the sound of the bell passed through, the streets seemed to have been injected with vitality and woke up one by one. People walked onto the streets one after another, bewildered. They asked each other what had happened. Luke Besson was waiting for news in the eastern barracks of Fortress Reedon, but the clear sound of the bell came from outside the stone window. He turned his head to look at the dimly lit city and his expression changed. Without waiting for the messenger outside to push open the door and report, the commander of the swordsman regiment opened the door and roared outside. "Didn't you hear me? Get up. Get up and assemble. Tell the 2nd and 3rd platoons to follow me to Pine Castle. That idiot Escobar." Everyone looked at each other in dismay. "Commander, what about the gate?" Someone stood up and asked. "Are you an idiot? Other than that Highland Knight, who else can break into Pine Castle? That idiot Escobar wants to hide the news and let him taste his own medicine." He calmed down a little and continued. "If anything happens to that person in the castle, you'll have to face the wrath of His Majesty the Dragon. Maybe someone wants him dead, but I don't want to be the scapegoat. As for the rest, just keep an eye on the target." Everyone was stunned for a moment before they started to move. Luke Besson let out a sigh of relief, but when he thought about the Highland Knight and his mage squire, he could not help but feel a little troubled. The Highland Knight had always had its own system and history. Even when the Corvado dynasty was at its peak, the royal family could not do anything about it, let alone him. He could not help but curse the female relatives of Esabar in his heart. Freya followed the girl into a long and deep alley. When she heard the sound of the bell, she was startled for a moment and subconsciously turned her head back. She raised her head to look in the direction of the bell with a worried expression. "What's wrong?" the girl called Sue asked. "Sorry, it's nothing. There's going to be a war," Sue suddenly said. Freya was startled and turned to look at her suspiciously. "The nobles have issued a prohibition order. They will only do this when there is a war." Although no one said it out loud, they knew it in their hearts. "It's always been like this in the past," Sue said quietly from the front. "Are you saying that they knew there would be a war? Who are they? Nobles?" Of course, they knew that they had their own channels to gather information. Generally speaking, when the news starts to spread in the bars in the city, they already know. Freya didn't answer. She just clenched her fists. She lowered her head, leaving only a flash of calm anger in her bright eyes. "But why is there no reaction from the city? We won't be able to see it even if there is a reaction, but the nobles will definitely be prepared. Since Fortress Reden is so secure, the people in the city don't have to worry too much. However, the price of bread and wheat has increased by 10% today. This is a change that you wouldn't normally notice. What if Fortress Reden falls? How could that be?" Freya couldn't help but think of Brando's confident attitude. She shook her head and threw this thought out of her mind. "But I have a friend who said that Fortress Reden will be breached." "Then he must be an imposter," replied Sue calmly from the front. The Shire went to the top of the barracks after ringing the alarm. He glanced at the city moat from the edge of the wall. There were a lot of people gathering on the streets. It seemed like the nobles' private soldiers had arrived first. However, this was not something he had to worry about. He withdrew his gaze and ran to the other side. He roughly estimated the distance from one end of the castle to the other, then found a feasible route and lit the witch candle in his hand. He recalled the method that Brando taught him and said, "Ahem." The first syllable was to activate a part of the magic that connected to the abyss of darkness. The twin goddess Irene was in charge of this part of the magic. If the witches weren't using psychic magic, they would use this part of the magic as a medium. The Shire then raised the candle in his hand and let the light reach about 15 feet away. He chose a tree and his whole body seemed to be pulled into a tunnel of light. When he came back to his senses, he found that he was already on the top of the tree. Amazing, as expected of the Bunassan's witches. The Shire looked around and this time he chose another tree. After repeating this 7 or 8 times, the candle in the Shire's hand was burnt to a small piece, but it was enough for him to reach the stone window on the other side. He raised the candle and placed it on the window. Then his whole body was thrown into the tunnel. When he came back to his senses, he was already in darkness. He shook his head to get rid of the dizziness caused by the teleportation. He could already hear the sound of fighting in front of him. It seemed like he was a little late, but it didn't matter. The Lord had left some time for him. The Shire comforted himself, but he didn't know that Brando wanted to stab him with his sword. A few minutes ago, when Brando pushed open the heavy oak door, he didn't see the Earl hiding in the corner and shivering as he expected. On the contrary, the room was well lit. The number of suet candles was enough to make the light not too bright or too dim. The Earl was sitting on the sofa. His black woolen suit was so neat that there wasn't even the slightest wrinkle. He raised his head and looked at Brando at the same level. In front of him was the elven sword, the Thorn of Light. Brando was slightly startled when he saw this scene. He didn't expect the king's minister to have such courage. Of course, this also made him vigilant. The other party was not afraid, which meant that he must have something to rely on. "I didn't expect it to be you, young man. I thought you were an assassin sent by those trash from Gettysburg. But of course you could also be an assassin hired by those bastards. But can you tell me the answer?" The middle-aged man was slightly surprised when he saw Brendel. But he still asked with a calm face, Gettysburg? Isn't this guy from the royal faction? Brando was puzzled, but he shook his head and said, I'm afraid not. But if you cooperate with me, I have no interest in killing you. Is that so? You have no interest in killing me? Then I really have to thank you. But unfortunately, I am very interested in killing you. As the middle-aged man spoke, a crossbow suddenly appeared in his hand. When Brando saw the edge of the crossbow flashing with a faint blue light, he knew that it was poisoned. But he was already prepared for this. He was very familiar with the tricks of the nobles. When the middle-aged man made a move, he swung his sword and blocked the arrow. But before he had time to relax, a gust of wind came from behind him. Brando's experience in countless battles made him instinctively pull back his sword to block the attack. A loud sound rang out. Brando was almost sent flying and crashed into a cabinet. After a series of cracking sounds, he clenched his teeth and crawled up from the broken pieces of wood. A black iron swordsman and a sneak attack. Is there any justice in this world? Brando couldn't help but feel scared. He was glad that his previous opponents were players. Otherwise, this sneak attack would have killed him instantly. Of course, he remembered his old opponents in the game. Players didn't need the so-called dignity of an expert. They were simply the synonym of shamelessness. Some of them were even wretched just for the sake of being wretched. That was the true definition of a hooligan. Because of this, Brando was already used to it. Guarding against sneak attacks had become an instinct for him. In other words, has anyone ever seen a player who didn't like sneak attacks? But even so, a black iron swordsman was still a problem for him. His strength was at least 15 ounces. Even if he activated Power Burst, he might not be able to gain the upper hand. On the other side, the middle-aged man and his companions were also shocked. They originally thought that their attack would definitely kill him. Although it looked like Brando was in a difficult situation, everyone knew in their hearts that for a black iron swordsman, that little bit of damage was nothing. The middle-aged man frowned but immediately sneered. I didn't know that this bug-like commoner had some skills, but this won't change the outcome. He picked up the elven sword and stood up. He sneered. You also saw the strength of my guard. You are not his opponent. But that's also true. How could a small character like you be worthy of such a treasure? I might as well give you a suggestion. How about you chop off the hand that touched this treasure sword and I'll let you live? Of course, your two companions are mine. I want them to be my slaves. I promise to treat them slightly better. At least I'll let them live like dogs. Haha. As he spoke, his face was filled with a savage smile. Brando couldn't help taking in a cold breath after hearing this. His face sunk. Although he knew that the other side was trying to provoke him, he still couldn't control his anger. But he could not suppress the anger in his heart. When he came to this world, the first people he came into contact with were Roman, Freya, and everyone in the militia. These people gave him a precious sense of reality when compared to this world. Just like the grandfather he had seen in his dreams, he had become his greatest spiritual support in this world. Because of this, how could he tolerate this fellow's insults here? His fingers, which were gripping the long sword, turned slightly white. The middle-aged man secretly observed Brando's expression, while his hand made a gesture to his companions behind him. The two people in the room were pleasantly surprised. Normally, experienced swordsmen would not lose their rationality because of external things, but they never thought that he would hit the other side's reverse scale with just a casual try. Ulysses, force him. The middle-aged man ordered with his hand gesture. The tall swordsman immediately closed in on Brando's side. His swordsmanship was exquisite, and there were almost no flaws in his attack path that could be exploited. Brando only had eyes for the middle-aged man. His body leaned forward, and his posture was the most aggressive military swordsmanship posture. Ulysses couldn't help secretly laughing when he saw this. A young boy was indeed a young boy. In front of a stronger opponent, he still dared to be impetuous. He couldn't help but hold the sword in his hand tightly, waiting for an opportunity to kill. He could almost see Brando's side opening. Ulysses! The middle-aged man suddenly shouted. Ulysses subconsciously thought that it was a signal for him to attack. Yes, it was at this moment. He had already seized a gap that Brando couldn't defend. He didn't have time to withdraw his sword. But the tall swordsman's face only revealed half of his sinister smile. The silver-gray ring on Brando's right index finger caught his eyes. OSS! There was a loud sound and there was no chance to retreat. The sharp thorns formed by the airflow pushed forward. The tall swordsman, who was hit head-on, had a strange depression on his face, chest, and lower abdomen. Then he was pushed to the ceiling by the huge wind pressure. With a loud bang, a big hole was opened in the ceiling. The light dimmed in an instant. Sand and stone chips fell down, accompanied by some viscous liquid and broken limbs on the other side. The middle-aged man almost didn't have time to react. A cold sword was placed on his neck from the side. "Tell me, how do you want to die?" Brando slowly walked out of the smoke and asked coldly. "P.S. There is a surprise. Please support." Chapter 62. You dare to kill me? The middle-aged man suppressed his fear and asked. "Why wouldn't I? I am Earl Dunn, an important official of His Majesty. You want to become enemies with the whole of Erewhon?" The middle-aged man's eyes were like a venomous snake spitting out its forked tongue. He glared at Brendel coldly. "It's not just you. Think about it carefully. Your companions will also be accused of the same crime." Brendel was taken aback when he heard that and fell silent. Earl Dunn thought that he had convinced Brendel and continued. "Of course, there is still room for negotiation between us. I can let you and your companions go. But for my reputation, you have to leave the elven sword behind." He spoke half-truthfully, but there was a deep hatred in his eyes. Brando sneered and looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot. "What do you think I was thinking, Earl Dunn?" The middle-aged man was slightly stunned. "I was thinking that some creatures are really stupid and ignorant. They don't even know why they died." Brando shook his head. Killing an important official of the king? Escaping from prison? In fact, no one would even notice these small details because this day was written like this. The year of summer leaves and flowers, June 2nd, the morning of Madara's army captured Fortress Reedon. Earl Dunn, the Golden Apple Lord, and the Whitemane Army's leader, Sir Luke Besson, were the pillars of the kingdom. Unfortunately, they died in the war and sacrificed their lives for the kingdom. As for me, I am just a passerby. Earl Dunn's eyes widened as he looked at Brando as if he saw a ghost. "You think I am lying to you? But I am not in the mood to joke with you. Since you're not willing to cooperate, then I'll use your head." Brendel finished speaking and cut off his head with his sword. Then he sat down and let out a long sigh. Brando's body felt weak after the continuous battles, not to mention that there were no benefits in these battles. It was not in line with his personality. However, when his gaze shifted to the headless body of Earl Dunn, he was immediately stunned. He looked at the ring on the dead man's middle finger and remained motionless. It was a ring with an O-shaped snake pattern on its surface. Brando was shocked at first, then he cursed loudly. Damn it, this guy turned out to be a member of All for One. He instinctively jumped up and tried to grab the Thorn of Light, but it was too late. The surface of the ring twisted, and a cold voice echoed in the room. "Very good, kid. Although I don't know who you are, you won't live for long." The sharp voice suddenly sounded and disappeared. If Brando didn't know what this organization was, he might have thought that he was hallucinating. However, Brando knew that this organization was jackals of the same tribe as the tree herders. In fact, they were even more mysterious. Back then, they were behind the overthrow of Erewhon and the Saint Tossol in the north. No one knew what their goal was, but most of the high-level quests seemed to be related to this organization. This huge organization was a mystery in the game, and it was also a mystery here. However, Brando knew that they were not kind people, and he also knew that the high-level members of this organization were able to sense each other through a ring called the Ouroboros ring. Once someone fell, the others would immediately know and elect a new person to take over that person's position. Of course, the next step would be revenge to the death. Damn it, I got into trouble with these people again. Lady Martha, are you messing with me? Brando held the elven sword tightly in his hand and cursed. He was unlucky in the game because of this organization, and the reason was that he killed one of their high-level members. He didn't expect history to be so similar here. Moreover, it was even a little earlier. "My lord, are you in there?" The Shire ran over to find that the battle was already over, but he was still thinking that the lord was indeed the lord. He could easily end the battle alone. He thought that asking him to come over was just a polite way of saying it. But Brando was furious when he heard this voice. If he didn't warn him, this guy would have run over to see a corpse. Although he didn't know if the card would return to its original form after the card holder died, he still didn't know. He casually picked up a stone and threw it out. The sorcerer apprentice was so scared that he quickly dodged to the side. "Wah, my lord, please listen to my explanation." "No need to explain, just this once." Brando calmed down after he vented his anger. He thought that he still had an advantage, and that was after tonight, Madara's army would raze Fortress Reedon to the ground. After the battle, it would be hard for them to find out who killed Earl Dunn. Although the unifying guild was powerful, it wasn't omnipotent. Thinking up to this point, he felt a little relieved. As long as they couldn't find him, they wouldn't be able to take revenge. Brando finally relaxed and turned back to ask, "How many mana potions do you have left?" "Not even one, but I feel like I've been squeezed dry." The young man smiled shyly. He was embarrassed to say that he didn't want to use the wizard's gold. Brando glanced at him and said, "Let's go to the roof, you can drink a potion on the way. The mana potion won't take effect instantly, so I want to see you revive on the spot before the next battle." "What do you mean by revive on the spot?" "Simply put, an adept without magic power is no different from a dead person. When you recover your mana, you will naturally revive on the spot." Although it's a little harsh, it seems like it's true. The Shire nodded. "Of course, why would I waste my breath on you?" Brando thought to himself. "Although I'm not a wizard, you're just a little wizard apprentice. I can at least teach you to be at least level 40. Of course, he was also a little puzzled. Why did this guy and that old witch Babasha seem to value the mana potions so much? Although the mana potions were relatively expensive, it shouldn't be to this extent, right? "My lord, every word is a gem." The young wizard was convinced. Brando picked up his sword and walked to Earl Dunn's side. He put the leaf-shaped elven sword close to the corpse. The sword's spine was a faint color, as if it could reflect the blood on the corpse's clothes. He frowned and recalled the scene from back then. Then he nodded. "My lord, what are you doing?" "I'm saving myself." "Saving yourself? Cut the crap, come with me. Tell me what you saw." Brando knew that he couldn't let this guy be too cocky, in case there would be another mistake next time. However, he didn't realize that his words and actions now were more and more like when he was a leader in the game. As the two walked, the Shire reported to Brando what he saw before. When he heard that there were nobles' private soldiers gathered outside the castle, Brando couldn't help but feel worried and relieved. On the one hand, it was undoubtedly difficult to escape from the hands of so many people. On the other hand, the pressure on Roman and Freya's side was imperceptibly reduced by a lot. To be honest, although he cheered them on, he was still very worried about the two girls. But halfway through, he suddenly remembered something. "By the way, the Shire, what about the thing I asked you to do?" "What is it?" "A Highland knight entrusts his squire to collect some money for his living expenses." The Shire immediately became excited when he heard this. "My lord, it's a great harvest." "With my lord's knowledge, you must have heard of the name Ramona Darklight. She was the little princess of Saint Tassel, who was born in the year of the croaking frogs. But her most famous identity is not her identity, but her time as a court painter in Cruz. Her paintings during that period were once famous in the Wonde, and were called the voice of the soul. She was also the pioneer of the Mazoran art style, a master of a generation. But I didn't expect that the Duke of Grimoires to be a fan of her. He has a lot of treasures in his collection." "No, I've never heard of this name. I only care about how much it's worth." Brando shook his head. Who would care about these things in the game? They usually only looted gold and silver utensils. Now that he thought about it, he was really uncultured. "Vulgar, my lord, how vulgar." The Shire shook his head in disdain. "But this painting should be able to sell for a few million tor on the black market. It's barely passable." The Shire saw that his lord did not have the same hobby as him, and he was a little dispirited for a while. However, he forced himself to stay alert and took out a book from his shrinking pouch. "My lord, I also got this book." "What is this?" "This is a book for collecting magic cards. Most of them are tarot cards used for divination. But there's something else in it." The young wizard opened the book and took out a card. "Take a look at this, my lord. Brando vaguely thought of something when he saw the card. But he took it and confirmed that it was a card of fate. It was a green card of the wind element. The number on the top left was an X, and there was a fluorescent equilateral triangle drawn on the card. There were 3 lines of incantations on the triangle. Time symbolized the target of the spell. Stao symbolized the mana that guided the spell. And E was the eye of the god of mana. The cost on the card was 3 green wind crystals. Brando turned the card over and scanned it. Energy loss, Spire X, wind elemental 3 spell instant with the target spell as the target. It will choose a new target. Your magic is under my control. Spire Guardian ode you. The Shire looked at Brando's expression and said, "This is a rare white magic card, my lord. It seems that our luck is not bad." White magic card? Brando asked. It's a magic card that has no requirements. But doesn't it have a cost? No, it's like this, my lord. Most of the spells and summons in the card of fate require you to be in a certain state, except for the basic land cards. Just like the Knight deck, it's locked onto the Knight's Path of Valor, so my lord can use it. The Shire replied. And the white magic card has no requirements? That's right, my lord. Brendel furrowed his brows and suddenly recalled the scene in Gerald's tomb. He wondered if there was a connection between the two. After all, in his previous life, he had never heard of any cards of fate in the game. In fact, he had this question for a long time, but today he had a chance to think about it. P.S. Surprise, this is the second update, there's a third one tonight. Everyone, if you're touched, then vote. Chapter 63. CPW 250H. 301 CU. http://file1. Chidian. Com chapters 2010122717847634290173011250512327. JPD. Ramona and Yao's work, The Year of the Golden Leaf. **********. Roman raised her small face to look at the wooden signboard. Because of the cool night, her fair face revealed a cute blush. Even though it was early summer, the temperature in the high mountains was still very low. The wooden signboard had a mottled horse painted on it. She couldn't read the words on it, but Roman guessed that it was here. She put her hands on her precious leather bag and rubbed the ground with her round boots. She hesitated for a moment. It should be here, right? That galloping horse inn? A group of guards walked past her in response to the alarm bell in the distance. But Romaine wasn't too afraid. Instead, she curiously looked at the guards and watched them walk away. When the alarm finally stopped, she let out a sigh of relief and walked back into the inn. The owner of the galloping horse inn was a dwarf, just like the description in the story. He had a long beard that was the color of ripe wheat. There were bundles of whips tied together with brass rings. The rings were all illusions. They were printed with patterns like. Of course, they were actually written in stone, the dwarven language. Each ring was written with the name of the family. Each ring represented a family's origin. Famous families such as Flaming Beard, Stone Seal, and luxury jewelry could even use expensive and heavy golden rings. These rings were the source of the dwarves' pride, just like their beards. Dwarven families had a history of more than 1,000 years. They would proudly wear these rings when they walked around. But dwarves were not common in human society, and the owner of the Galloping Horse Inn, Gun Barbarossa Rockhall, made good use of this advantage. He deliberately dressed himself up as a big shot, paid people to discuss it in private, and then denied it himself. People were always curious about this mysterious dwarf lord, and there was an endless stream of visitors. Naturally, Gun's business grew bigger and bigger. Today, Gun was wearing a silk robe. He had 3 ruby rings, an opal ring, and an emerald ring on his chubby fingers. If it wasn't his nephew, of course it was a human. Since Gun was able to establish himself in the human society, he naturally had some connections with humans. As for why a dwarf would have a human relative, it would take 3 days and 3 nights to get to the bottom of it. So our main point was that his nephew, who was serving in the White Mane Army, was pressing on his shoulder and telling him something. The young man had a companion beside him. The two of them seemed to have been here for quite some time. You're saying that if I see a little girl, no matter what she asks for, I have to agree to her first? But why? What if she wants me to give her all my assets? No, this suggestion sounds too stupid. The dwarf boss shook his head and mumbled. Uncle Gun, listen to me. I'm not asking you to give her the family property, but to prepare a carriage for her. Don't make her suspicious. Then prepare another carriage for us to follow her. Only carriages? Cone stared at his nephew suspiciously with his small eyes. Of course. Okay, will she pay? The young man from the White Mane Army sighed. He knew his uncle's temperament well and quickly said, Of course she will, but don't bargain too much with her. Don't scare her away. As long as Uncle Gun is willing to help, the credit will be mine. Do you understand? I still don't understand, but do you like that girl? If that's the case, I can consider giving you a discount of 5%. No, it's not like that. It's actually like this. That girl is actually a spy from Madara. They just escaped from the dungeon and must be in a hurry to leave the city. Captain Luke Besson ordered us to monitor every possible way out of the city. Then why don't you just capture her? Gun asked curiously. Parker slapped his forehead and sighed. Uncle Gun, she has a lot of accomplices. In order to capture them all, we have to think of a way to lower their guard and secretly tail them. Do you understand? I still don't understand. Okay, in short, Uncle Gun, don't worry. I'll make up for the money she didn't pay. Lower our guard and fulfill her request, right? Now I understand. The dwarf boss nodded. Although he was a calculative person, he was still very efficient. After a while, he called for a servant and ran back to ask, I've already arranged everything. When will the girl come? I don't know either. I hope she will come to us first. I can't let grandson look down on me. The young man sighed and felt his companion patting his shoulder. He raised his head to look outside and jumped up in excitement. He immediately pushed the dwarf forward and said, It's her, she's here. Quick, uncle, it's up to you. Relax, young man. Don't push me forward like a bag of potatoes. I've been doing business for 30 years, I know what to do. Gun did not forget to boast at the last moment. When Roman walked into the inn, she couldn't help but look around curiously. She had never seen such a large use of stone before, but when she saw the low walls and pillars of the stone barricade, she felt a familiar feeling in her heart. The future merchant girl was looking around when she saw a dwarf standing in front of her, his beard almost touching the ground. Are you a dwarf? She asked. No, I'm a dwarf. The innkeeper corrected her seriously. Mr. Dwarf, are you the boss here? I'm a dwarf, not a dwarf. Little girl, do you understand? Of course I'm the boss here. But I want to find a place to rent a carriage. Do you rent carriages here? Of course, what else do you think I'm doing here? Do I need to pay? Roman was still looking around the inn curiously. Of course, the principle of doing business is to make sure the goods are paid. We charge based on the number of days the carriage is rented. But in principle, the Galloping Horse Inn does not rent carriages for more than a day. Also, if the carriage is damaged because of the guest, we have to pay the price. In fact, our coachman also has the right to refuse orders that may threaten his life. Of course, if this clause conflicts with the previous one, it is invalid. When it came to business, Gun couldn't stop talking. How much do I need to rent it for half a day? 30 tor. Roman took out a blue-gray bag and shook it in her hand. 2 and 3 copper coins fell out. She looked up and asked with a blank face. But I only have this much money, can I rent it? You can rent a wheel. Gun originally wanted to say this, but he suddenly remembered his nephew's words and changed his words. All right, although it's not enough. Little girl, when do you plan to get a carriage? I'm going to get one soon. How can I find my own carriage? The carriage is parked at the back. This is your number plate. Take it and you can find your own carriage. Oh right, do you want me to take you there? Gun reluctantly handed over a copper plate. He remembered that he hadn't done a losing business for many years. There's no need for that. I still have some friends outside and I need to ask for their opinion. Can we settle the bill first? Of course. Settling the bill is my favorite thing. Gun wiped his forehead. He felt that this business really went against his principles. But for the sake of his nephew, and of course mainly because of the compensation, he reluctantly did it this time. On the other side, the dwarf's nephew Parker and his companions were hiding in the kitchen. They saw Roman walking out of the inn with a satisfied expression. They ran out and pulled his uncle to ask, "How was it? Did you get it?" "Of course. Don't you know who your Uncle Gun is? I used to do business with the insatiable ogres." The dwarf couldn't help but repeat the previous details. When Parker heard this, he slapped his forehead and shouted, "Martha above! Uncle Gun, what did you do? She must know that we are here. She's not going to ride in your carriage, Uncle Gun. We've screwed things up." "What's wrong? Which merchant would do business without considering the gains and losses? 1/10 of the price? Uncle Gun, you're being too kind. I didn't expect that woman to be so smart. She must have suspected us from the start. What else did she say?" The young man didn't expect his uncle to ruin things with good intentions. "She said she wanted to ask for the opinion of her companions." Companions? Parker and his companions looked at each other and immediately chased after her. The dwarf boss was left behind and shouted, "I said wait. You two brats, where's the money you promised me?" He was so angry that he snorted. Young people nowadays don't have any respect for the elderly. However, when he turned around, he saw his shop's waiter running over. He bent over and said to him, "Big boss, the carriage you arranged has already left." "The carriage I arranged? What carriage I arranged?" Gun felt that he was about to go crazy from anger. He looked at his attendant in confusion. "It's the car that you said you'd satisfy all her requests. Speaking of which, that young lady is really beautiful and has a good personality. Is she young Master Parker's lover?" The waiter even exclaimed in admiration. "What?" The dwarf looked at him as if he wanted to eat him alive. "Miss, where are we going?" The carriage moved forward with the sound of the wheels rolling. The scenery on both sides of the window flashed by quickly. All of this made the girl feel curious. But soon, a question came from outside the carriage. "I like to see the scenery. Let's go to the south gate first. Then we'll go around to the north gate. What scenery are there on the way?" "Of course. We should pass by the mansion of the Everton Knight." "Everton? Who is that?" "The Everton Knight. He is a famous hero." When Brando and the Shire climbed to the top of the tower of Pine Castle, they couldn't help but gasp when they looked down. Outside the castle, there was a black mass of nobles' private soldiers surrounding the castle. Those mercenaries were holding torches, and the light from the torches was like a fire dragon coiling around the moat of Pine Castle. The nobles' private soldiers had already broken through the gate, and were about to enter the castle. The loud explosion caused by the wind bullet spell made the nobles realize that something was wrong. They began to prepare to attack. Brando and his young wizard squire saw the scene below and their faces turned pale. It seemed like a miracle that they were able to break out of the encirclement. Although they had the gargoyle to rely on, the gargoyle couldn't fly high with two people on its back. Brando held his breath and became nervous. He pointed at another fire dragon and said, "Do you see that? The White Mane Army is here too." "I'd rather not see that, my lord." "That's true. I don't have that many votes." Chidian Chinese website welcomes all readers to read the latest, fastest, and most popular works from Chidian Originals. Chapter 64. Mr. Cyber, look at that. The mercenary leader took down a brass telescope and peeked at the top of the tower before passing it to the noble beside him. The Golden Apple Lord sat calmly on his horse. The horse was an Aween Arek horse with a fine bloodline. Aween's hussars used to use them as war horses. Although they were later changed to wyverns, the nobles still rode horses to show their status. He took the telescope and glanced at it, then passed it to his companion without changing his expression. The plump industrialist, Burnley. The Golden Apple Lord was not too nervous. Even if Earl Dunn died in their territory, it would only ruin their reputation. Nobles like them did not care about such things and only cared about benefits. If the king were to blame them, the old bastard Luke Besson would take the blame. The nobles would not be blamed. To be honest, he hoped that something would happen to Earl Dunn, but he did not dare to be too obvious. He purposely misjudged the situation and waited for his private soldiers to gather before launching an attack on the castle. But there was one thing he was determined to get. He would only have an advantage if he got his hands on Earl Dunn. If Earl Dunn was captured by the White Mane Army, he would have to bear the blame for changing the military documents. Burnley took the monocular with a smile and glanced at it, then said, "Someone is on the spire of the tower. Makaru, go and get me some archers. They must be at least white rank. Don't bother with those who are not up to par. Our opponent is an iron swordsman." The Golden Apple Lord pointed up and ordered the mercenary leader. "No problem, my lord. Just watch. I don't care if he is an iron swordsman or a Highland knight. I will turn him into a porcupine." The mercenary leader nodded and turned his horse to leave. The noble's private soldiers separated into 2 rows and raised their torches for the leader to trot over. Not far away, the horsemen were noisily galloping about on the riverbank. Flames danced in the air, creating a chaotic scene. The Golden Apple Lord frowned. What a vulgar bunch. If they appeared there, does that mean that Earl Dunn has already? Burnley smiled and made a gesture of drawing a line across his neck. Humph, he's just the 2nd generation of the Louis Bowman family. He relied on his mouth to please the emperor. He thought that because he was an important minister of the emperor, he did not put the whole world in his eyes. People like him were arrogant for a while when they were favored, but in the future people hated him. Therefore, dying on the streets is a very normal thing. The Golden Apple Lord snorted. This wonderful man is a famous naturalist and connoisseur in the court. That's why His Majesty values him so much. Burnley pointed out the omissions in his companion's words, intentionally or otherwise. He's just a joker. As the 2 of them discussed, a rider flew over to report. The knight rode a panting warhorse in front of them and reported, "My lord, the Whitemane army has arrived." "Oh, how many have come?" the Golden Apple Lord asked. "There are more than 20 of them. They seem to be the vanguard. Keep them outside," he ordered, pointing with his horsewhip. "Yes." Just as the knight left, another rider passed by him and reported, "My lord, the archers are in position." The Golden Apple Lord nodded. "That's enough. Let Grantham hurry up and attack the city. I have long suspected that they have the ability to fly. But this time, I'll make sure that they can't escape even if they have wings." "That's a Highland knight. How do you plan to deal with him?" Burnley asked. It was supposed to be a tricky matter, but since he killed that idiot so brazenly, even if he was a member of the White Knights, no one would be able to protect them, let alone the fact that he was a descendant of the Highland Knights. The Golden Apple Lord raised his head and saw a black shadow landing on the top of the spire. It then carried the 2 of them and flew towards them. He immediately pulled on the reins and turned around to look. He saw his archers drawing their longbows, and under the command of a sharp whistle, tens of thousands of arrows were released. "Wah wah, my lord. They have archers." The Shire screamed in fear as he struggled under the gargoyle's claws. "Nonsense, I can see it even if you don't tell me," Brando replied in annoyance. He swung his sword and cut an arrow in half. His hand was slightly numb from the force. His heart sank. The opponent was at least a level 1 iron archer. Speaking of which, the 2 of them were hooked by the gargoyle's claws and the arrows below flew towards them and hit the gargoyle's wings. Although they were not injured for the time being, Brando felt that he would not be able to handle it if they flew closer. "Fly down," he ordered in a deep voice. "Fly down." The Shire's eyes widened. He thought that his lord must have gone crazy. If they flew down like this, wouldn't they become porcupines? "We can't fly over, and it's too late to turn back. They're all around us. Rather than that, it's better to fight to the death. Who knows, maybe we'll have a chance to survive." Brando sighed and stared at the black mass of people below. "My lord, you really like to gamble. Believing in your own ability is called courage. Placing your fate on luck is called recklessness. There's a fine line between recklessness and courage. The key is how you grasp it. This is one of my mottos in the game. Remember it well." Brando turned around and said to his squire, "Game? Didn't I tell you before? Life is like a game and a game is like life." Brando suddenly laughed. His chest was wide open, and he felt that his mind was clearer than ever. The gargoyle flew a little lower. The whistling sound of the wind surrounded the 2 of them. They could almost see the noble's private soldiers below with their bows drawn. But when the bowstrings moved, another wave of arrows flew towards them. Brando gritted his teeth and blocked it, but an arrow still grazed him and brought a splash of blood. The gargoyle made a turn in the air and attracted most of the firepower. As one of the most famous monsters above level 20, even Brando's Ring of the Wind Empress couldn't make it lose its mobility. These arrows were like a drizzle of rain. It was a pity that its mobility in the air was average. Otherwise, Brando could order it to use special flying skills to cover the two of them as they flew out. Brando thought for a moment and took out a ruby from his chest. This ruby was obtained from the noble's body. Have you recovered your magic? Of course. Come, give me a bow. Bow. The Shire took the ruby and was stunned. My lord, at this time in my personal opinion a shield is better than a bow. Attack is the best defense, the Shire. Brando replied. Then it's up to me. The young mage nodded and raised the ruby. Projectile ability, power conversion, bow construction. With the bright ruby as the center, invisible lines were drawn out. They quickly intertwined into a net of light. The surface of the light curved and formed a longbow made of lines. The longbow had no physical body. It was only composed of lines, full of mysticism. The bow's arm and string were engraved with profound law patterns and ancient runes, representing the power under this law. Because the construction spell itself was a kind of law magic, a sub-branch of gem magic. In exchange for the energy in the gem, the lines of law materialized in this world. The only law represented by the materialization of the bow was the projectile ability. Therefore it didn't need arrows and could shoot. Seeing Brando take the bow, the Shire reminded him. My willpower is only enough for it to shoot the bow 4 times. Let's try. The third wave of arrows came as scheduled. What kind of monster is that? The Golden Apple Lord pointed at the gray creature with a huge wingspan behind Brando and asked. Beside him, Burnley's eyes flashed, but he didn't answer. That's a gargoyle, my lord. It's a creation of the Buga craftsman. It's a type of war golem. Instead, it was a mercenary beside him who answered respectfully. That's a gargoyle? The Golden Apple Lord's expression changed. He couldn't help but take a deep breath. He had long heard that the Highland Wizards of Karsuk were a branch of the Buga Wizards. It seemed that the rumor was true. He couldn't help but think. Offending the Highland Knight was fine, but offending the Buga Wizards was a matter of life and death. Sir Cyber, we don't have a choice. Burnley's eyes moved and added fuel to the fire. Seeing that the Golden Apple Lord suddenly turned around to look at him, the industrialist was shocked. He realized that he had overdone it. The fat man smiled and shook his head. But the Buga Wizards aren't easy to offend. The Golden Apple Lord raised his head again, feeling a little uneasy. Brendel used his sword to deflect the stray arrows, and threw the sword he got from the guard to the ground. He raised his bow and looked for the commander of the archers, but soon a person entered his sight. The mercenary leader, Makava, stood among the archers. At first he couldn't believe that the enemy would be so bold as to dive into the battlefield. But he quickly recognized the monster. It was a gargoyle. His long experience in battle gave him a sense of danger. He immediately shouted to the adjutant beside him. It's close enough. Let the archers fire another volley. The noble's private soldiers understood what he meant. After the volley they would fire freely. Then the knights on both sides prepared to seal off the battlefield. The private soldiers drew their bows. Brando took a deep breath, and the bow in his hand trembled slightly. Although the bow of law didn't require any technique, it was difficult for him to maintain his balance on the undulating claws of the highland. He took aim for a few seconds and lightly released the bowstring. A white light shot out from his hand. The white light pierced through the crowd and hit about 5 meters behind Makavo. Oh! The Shire sighed. Brando didn't panic. Instead he became calmer. He drew his bow again, and the arrow pierced through 2 people and hit an archer behind Makavo, sending him flying. When he drew his bow again, Makavo was already retreating in panic. He thought that it was a wizard attacking him. Any normal person would subconsciously tremble in fear when facing a wizard. This arrow caused the adjutant to fall off his horse. Brando had already adjusted his aim. The last arrow, my lord. They're about to counterattack. Brando saw Makavo enter the crowd and frowned. He hesitated for a moment and shot another arrow into the group of archers. The arrow pierced through the crowd and blew up 3 or 4 people. The archers on both sides were frightened and retreated. Once the center retreated, the private army's formation was messed up. This gave Brando time to realize that his judgment was correct. He immediately ordered the gargoyle to fly over their heads. But just when he thought that it was a close call, a lasso shot out from the crowd and accurately hit one of the gargoyle's wings. Brando was shocked and turned around. It was the mercenary leader, Makavu. At this time, the gargoyle was already very close to the ground. With a tug, the two of them and the war golem were pulled down from the sky. The gargoyle dragged the rope in an arc in the sky before crashing into the riverbank not far away. Makavu shouted excitedly and let go of the rope. He didn't care about the blood on his hands and shouted to the soldiers beside him, "Go! Catch them!" The situation seemed to have changed. P.S. Pleading for votes. Pleading for votes. Chidian website welcomes all readers to read. The newest, fastest, and most popular series are all at Chidian Originals. Chapter 65. The gargoyle slid on the soft ground for more than 10 meters before coming to a stop. This level of impact was nothing more than a scratch to these monsters, but it was enough to make Brando and his wizard squire fall to the ground. The moment they landed, the surrounding nobles' private soldiers became excited and charged towards the river like a swarm of bees. Even though they were a disorderly bunch, the cavalry's charge was still frightening. The Shire shook his head as he got up from the mud and was shocked by the scene. He immediately asked, "My lord, what should we do?" Brando pulled his leg out from the mud and drew his sword. "Nonsense, make a wall." This was the most ancient and classic tactic used by Erewhon's wizards to fight against cavalry. The tactics of the players grew from this foundation because it was especially effective against cavalry that lacked training. The young wizard understood and pointed forward with the ruby. "Stop, counteract, wall structure." Countless lines radiated out from the ruby in all directions, forming a wall. Then all the lines disappeared, leaving behind a solid wall of air. The nobles' private soldiers did not even realize what was going on. Only a small number of mercenaries who had experience fighting against wizards moved to the sides. Even though Makavu, the leader of the mercenaries, shouted for his men to change direction, no one could hear him due to the rumbling of the horses' hooves. The first row of riders crashed into the wall of air, the horses kneeling on the ground while the riders flew out and crashed into the wall. Then, the second row crashed into the first row, the huge inertia causing them to squeeze together. Then the third row followed closely behind. This time, the wall of air could not withstand the force and shattered. A large number of horse and human corpses rushed forward and slid to the feet of Brando and the Shire. All of this happened in an instant. The frightening momentum caused Brando and the Shire to involuntarily take a step back. Makavu cursed at the back. Someone like him who had been in the army for a long time knew that the first row of 7 would not survive. Even the second row would be heavily injured. The third row was dizzy from the fall, and would not be able to rejoin the battle for a while. Moreover, their horses were more or less injured. How could he not feel heartache when he had crippled 20 to 30 people in one go? The leader of the mercenaries couldn't help but spit on the ground. He casually bandaged his bleeding palm, then cursed as he pulled out his saber and rushed forward. There were still 7 or 8 cavalrymen on the battlefield, and they were all experienced veterans. He had to lead them to suppress the enemy until the infantry caught up. This was especially true for that adept. Every mercenary knew what it meant to let an adept do whatever he wanted. Makavu waved his saber twice to signal his men to spread out and surround them from all directions. However, he couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. These mercenaries were veterans of war, and each of them was at least a low-level iron-ranked fighter. Yet, at this critical moment they were cowering and trying to preserve their strength. "Follow me. Attack together." Although he was angry, Makavu knew that he had to motivate these people. However, he didn't know that the young man opposite him had been observing him for a long time. Brando saw the erect horse galloping back and forth, and saw the knight on the horse shouting loudly. He guessed that this was the leader of the mercenaries. He couldn't help but think to himself, "It's not like I haven't fought with you mercenaries before. What's the point of being so secretive about your tactics?" Brando spat as he turned his head and pressed on the Shire's shoulder. He pointed at the man in front and said, "I see that person. Use magic arrows to attack him." The Shire quickly shook his head and said, "He's on a horse. I'm not that accurate." "It's fine. You don't have to worry about magic." If you can't hit him with one shot, just shoot him a few more times. That's not a problem. Brando turned his head to look at the 7 or 8 knight not far away. He pressed his hand on the elven sword and forced himself to calm down. He looked up and saw that the leader of the mercenaries had circled behind the rider. As expected, he raised his saber and charged forward. He knew that the leader wanted to lead the others in a charge. 30 meters. 20 meters. But Brando was waiting for this opportunity. His sword flashed and a gust of wind swept out. Makavu saw the transparent ripple spreading across the ground. Even though he hadn't seen the royal court's swordsmanship before, he knew that danger was approaching. He decisively jumped up from his horse. Just as he stood up, the wind from Brendel's sword swept across the 4 hooves of the Erex warhorse. The tall warhorse's entire body was bent over, and its 4 limbs were all severed as it rolled forward. Makavu gasped in the air. He could only think of one word: sword aura. But before he could finish his thought, a white light pierced through the air and pierced his chest. Then the second light hit his left shoulder, the third light hit his abdomen, and the fourth light brushed past his body. Makavu was forced to change directions 3 times in the air before his corpse was finally tossed far away into the sand and stopped moving. This turn of events caused the 7 or 8 riders to pull on their reins. They weren't shocked by Makavu's death, but because of that sword aura. Temple Knight. The mercenaries' expressions changed as they guessed who that terrifying youth was. That was a good shot. Brando sheathed his sword. It's all thanks to my lord. The Shire replied with a straight face. Brendel smiled and raised his head to look ahead. Although the enemy was now stunned, he was far from being able to relax. There were still more than 100 nobles' private soldiers moving in the forest of spears behind him. He exhaled and went through his plan again in his mind. He stared at the north and realized that the only chance to break through was in that direction. But he wasn't sure if he could grasp it. He could only point forward and order, "Gargoyle, WSI, Witchcraft, advance." Brando thought to himself, since there's no attack command, I'll just use the movement command. The Golden Apple Lord stood on the high ground and looked at the scene from afar. His face was as ugly as it could get. Even though they weren't elite soldiers, they were trained by him. Especially Makavu, who was a valiant general under him. Even though he was a little rough around the edges, it was an undeniable fact that he was strong in battle. The Highland Knight is indeed the Highland Knight. I didn't believe the rumors of the White Knight Regiment's strength, but now it seems like it's true. The industrialist Sir Burnley said with a smile. It seems like Earl Dunn is doomed this time. Let's see if that tiger dares to take this hot potato. But it's not good for us if he gets a dead man. Not to mention there are still 2 women that we haven't seen yet. What I'm curious about is why he wants to kill that jester. If he's really from Butchie's militia, taking him as a hostage would be a better strategy. What a pity, I thought I could rely on a big tree. Burnley pretended to sigh, but there was a smile in his eyes. Actually, it's not a good thing to be in such a hurry. There's still a lot to see between the royal family and the White Mane Army. But this young man is either an assassin or he has other motives. If he didn't kill for the sake of killing, then I think there's something wrong with that sword. The Golden Apple Lord held the reins and looked forward. That elven sword? Just as he was about to nod his head, he saw his private soldiers in the distance move to the sides in an uproar, like a tide that could not be avoided. Startled, the Golden Apple Lord suddenly saw a gargoyle rushing towards him through the crowd. His words came to an abrupt halt as he subconsciously tightened his grip on the reins, intending to turn around. However, due to his nervousness, he exerted too much force, causing the warhorse to neigh and stand up. "My lord, be careful." The gargoyle was above level 20, and its strength was equivalent to a level 1 warrior. Furthermore, it was known for its defense and flying ability. It was like a tiger entering a flock of sheep when it charged into the ranks of the nobles' private soldiers. Especially when it came to these gigantic monsters, the humans had an instinctive fear. After all, not everyone could recognize that it was the work of a Bugo wizard. There were even some who shouted in fear. Flying dragon. Originally, Brando had expected the gargoyle to cut through the weak formation of the soldiers, but he knew that he didn't have much time. The nobles' private soldiers were only temporarily confused, and no matter how strong the gargoyle was, it wouldn't be able to fight against 100 of them. In fact, if the opponent was well trained, it would be a problem to fight against 10 of them. He had to spread the chaos and not let these people have time to stabilize themselves. Brando immediately shouted, "The Shire, follow me and cover me." As soon as he finished speaking, he had already rushed forward. The gargoyle plowed a path through the crowd. The soldiers on both sides wanted to rush forward to block the path, but Brando swung the elven sword forward with all his might. A gust of wind swept through the crowd like a scythe, and a row of 7 or 8 people in front fell down like wheat stubble. The people behind were shocked and no longer had the heart to continue fighting. They quickly retreated, and at this moment, the path opened by the gargoyle became wider. If Makavo was still around, he might be able to suppress them, but now the noble's private soldiers were like a group of dragons without a leader. Brando and the Shire took the opportunity to pass through the forest of spears. As for those who wanted to follow after them, the Shire naturally wouldn't be polite to them. He still had 2 bottles of mana potion, and magic arrow was a cheap and useful spell. Brando raised his head and vaguely saw a group of nobles standing on a hill not far away. His sharp eyes saw Sir Burnley among them and immediately ordered loudly, "Gargoyle, that fatty airy, witchcraft, seize." But before he finished speaking, he suddenly saw a group of knights charging out from the left side of the battlefield. These knights were all wearing dark blue armor, pointed hats, and a set of silver breastplate with a white mane fluttering behind them. They were the light cavalry of the White Mane army. At that moment, both sides on the battlefield understood that the tiger Luke Besson had arrived. Bacchus Terran, take down that Madara spy. Even in the midst of the army, Luke Besson's calm voice was clear enough to make everyone's heart skip a beat. Just as he finished speaking, 2 tall knights rode out from the left and right and charged towards Brando. Good timing. Brando snorted in his heart and activated charge, and in an instant, he flashed past the 2 of them. Bacchus and Terran were slightly startled, and when they turned around, they realized that the young man was already 10 meters behind them. Actually, it wasn't just them, most of the White Mane soldiers were also startled. Bacchus and Terran were captains, and although their strength was only at the lower tier of iron rank, they shouldn't be so easily shaken off, right? Luke Besson's eyebrows twitched. Charge! Is this young man related to the Sun Knight? He immediately raised his right hand. Austin Schick, stop him! Another 2 riders rode out side by side. Even though most of the White Mane soldiers were mounted infantry, the captains were still skilled in riding. They arrived in front of Brando in an instant, but what made everyone's jaw drop was that before the lower-ranked soldiers could cheer for their captains, Austin and Schick were already sent flying. Only the sharper ones could see that the young man didn't even stop, and when he passed by the 2 captains, he clashed with their swords, and the 2 captains' swords shattered at the same time, and they were sent flying back as if they had collided with a dragon. Power burst. Power burst. This time most of them recognized it. Brando didn't even care. He had already seen his gargoyle lifting that damn fatty up. That fatty was the only target of his attack, and also the key to escape. But victory was in sight, wasn't it? P.S. Removed from the ranking in less than a month. Sad. Seeking consolation. Chapter 66. With a shrill scream, the gargoyle swooped down and grabbed Burnley's shoulder with its hook-like claws, lifting the ball-shaped body into the air. The industrialist did not react at first. He waved his arms and legs in a panic and wanted to shout, but when he saw the situation he was in, he was so scared that his face turned pale and he could not move. Everyone looked up. Although they despised him, they knew that they would not fare any better if they were in his shoes. Brando held his sword with one hand and stood in front of the army. He waved his hand without turning back. Gargoyle? Witchcraft? Come back. When he turned around again, it was as if the tide of the ocean had receded. Under his gaze, over 100 people actually took a step back. As soon as the noble's private soldiers retreated, they revealed Seal, who was being held back by countless spears. Don't move, I surrender. The young adept immediately raised his hand when he saw this, indicating that he had no intention of resisting. I say, this guy should have some backbone, right? Brando could not help but sigh and shake his head. But Charles acted as if he did not see it. Instead, he winked at him, meaning, the rest is up to you, my lord. I've done my best. It was a good thing that Brendel was not angered to death. At this moment, the white-maned riders entered the battlefield and formed a semicircle behind Brando. They seemed to want to take over control of the situation from the nobles' private soldiers. The Golden Apple Lord wanted to curse when he saw this scene, but he had lost Makavu, and Burnley, who had been giving him advice, was suspended in the air. His other captain, grandson, was attacking the castle. He had no one to rely on other than a bunch of random people. He endured it and rode up alone. In fact, he was sweating profusely. He almost thought that the gargoyle's charge was directed at him. But why did that young man grab Burnley? The Golden Apple Lord came to the encirclement with doubts in his heart, and stood opposite of Luc Besson with a group of nobles. Both sides did not talk much. Or rather, there was nothing to talk about. The conflict between the Grenoir's nobles and the local army had been going on for a long time. There was no need for formalities. On the other hand, Tiger Luc Besson was like a javelin on a horse. This dark-skinned soldier glanced at the nobles led by the Golden Apple Lord and laughed in disdain. Although he was in the White Mane army, his heart was with the king's faction. He looked down on both sides and naturally would not lower himself to the level of these short-sighted nobles. On the contrary, his gaze fell on Brendel. This young man who was able to remain calm in the face of an army, and defeated 4 of his captains with a single sword strike, had truly piqued his interest. But what surprised him was that the young man's gaze also passed through the crowd and landed on him. "He knows me?" Luc Besson frowned but quickly calmed down. "Young man, I will give you a chance. Put down the pitiful Sir Burnley. As you can see, your comrade is also in our hands." He opened his mouth and took over the command from the Golden Apple Lord. When Brando heard this voice, he immediately recognized that it was Tiger Luc Besson. Before the First War of the Black Rose, he had heard him speak from afar when he was doing an honorary mission in Fortress Reden. Tiger Luc Besson, an upper silver swordsman. He was one of the most powerful people in Erewhon. In front of such a powerful person, Brando did not dare to be careless. He let out a sigh of relief and thought quickly. He looked at the Golden Apple Lord and then looked at Luc Besson. He knew that his only chance of survival depended on them opposing each other. This antagonism did not arise by chance. In Fortress Reden, the conflict between the local noble council and the local army was similar to most of the conflicts in this ancient country. It all started from the unique political system of Erewhon. Because it originated from the divided empire of Gruus, Erewhon's laws were derived from the Dark Empire's laws. But after the long war between the lords, in order to prevent history from repeating itself, the 4th monarch of the kingdom, Ein I, set up a new system where the royal family controlled the army, and the local military and politics were divided. With duchies and counts as the foundation, the lords formed a small country. In these countries, the lords enjoyed complete legislative and administrative power. However, in terms of taxation, the king had the first right to levy taxes on all mines, forests, and farmlands in any territory, while the nobles only had the second right to levy taxes. Other than the militia and guards, the nobles were not allowed to form their own private army. The local defense was taken care of by the royal family's army. Through the system of taxation and central army, during the era of the king's power, the royal family closely monitored the local areas and built the powerful kingdom of Erewhon. But Brando knew that as long as one was human, they would make mistakes. Behind the glory of the kingdom, there were hidden dangers. With the decline of the king's power, the disadvantages gradually emerged. The conflict originated from the internal division of the royal family. About 60 years ago, when the devout believer Edward ascended the throne, Erewhon entered the era of the Corvado dynasty. Duke Erec, who also had the right to inherit the throne, had always held a grudge. When the internal division of the royal family was divided, the local army began to have different factions. And when the royal family found that they could not effectively control the large army, the central authority in the local areas began to weaken. In fact, ever since the year of the cave beast, the king's taxation officers could not even enter a third of the territory. It was clear to see how much the royal family's authority had weakened. He knew that ever since Duke Erec had taken over his father's position 11 years ago, he had forced King Oberg VI to change the new defense laws. The only military forces under the royal family's control were the imperial guards, Cypher's Black Blade Squad, and the 11th Free Cavalry Company stationed in Ampere Seal. Based on this background, the royal family's influence on the local areas became weaker and weaker. But even so, the local areas were not monolithic. The local nobles and the local army's struggle for power was becoming more and more intense. Just like in Grimoires, the feud between Count Pulla and the Grand Duke of Grimoires had long been a topic of gossip. And in Fortress Reden, this conflict was manifested between the Golden Apple Lord and Luc Besson. Although they had the same attitude towards giving up the Bucci region, it was up to their own abilities to decide who would bear the responsibility. Luc Besson had been at a disadvantage all this time, but now that they had appeared, things had taken a turn for the better. This change was whether or not he was part of the Bucci militia. As long as they were here, the excuse prepared by the Golden Apple Lord would become a lie. Deceiving the king was not a small matter. Although the royal family was the royal family in name, the central authorities' reprimand could be used as an excuse for the nobles to attack each other. After thinking about this, Brando realized that his life was not in danger for the time being. Maybe the Golden Apple Lord would want him to die, but that would have to depend on Luc Besson's agreement. Brando suddenly felt a little sad. He already knew all of this, but he could not explain it to Freya. If the girl knew that all of her efforts were destined to be ruined by these people who still had to fight each other in the end, she would not be able to accept it. But even though it was sad, he had to thank Martha for making these people short-sighted, allowing him to use this opportunity to speak. When he heard Luc Besson's words, he could not help but reveal a cold smile. What a joke, everyone! His nonsensical words stunned everyone. Joke! Luc Besson looked down from his horse and laughed. What's so funny about it? Brando thought to himself that he would not be able to laugh soon. He waved his hand to summon the gargoyle to his side. Then he threw the elven sword from his left hand to his right hand. Sir Luc Besson. He turned his head and said, Your lordship, you want me to put this fatty down? He patted Burnley's face with his hand, and he could not help but think of the scene when he first saw these people 1 or 2 hours ago. The scene where Earl Dunn took away his sword and raised it. These memories flowed through his mind like water, calming him down. He raised his head and replied, What I think is funny is that some people do not even know that they are about to die. Do you really think that Fortress Reden is safe and that Madara's army does not dare to step into Erwin's territory? Madara? Luc Besson and the Golden Apple Lord were stunned again. Kid, what are you trying to say? The Golden Apple Lord was still thinking about the relationship between Abel and Wizard Gabe, so he could not help but step forward and ask. Brando did not want to waste time with them. He picked up the sword and placed it next to Burnley's neck. Before he even said a word, the elven sword had already shined brightly, and a layer of fluorescent light flashed on its surface. Sir Burnley is rich and knowledgeable. Can you tell me where this sword came from? Brando suddenly sneered and asked in the same tone as someone else. The fat man who was being held by the gargoyle suddenly struggled with all his might and retreated backwards. But Brando did not care about him. He finally confirmed what he was thinking and could not help but scold. This sword is called the Thorn of Light. It is a sword that was born from light. All the undead have nowhere to hide in front of it. Unfortunately, you only cared about admiring the sword and forgot what happened when Earl Dunn got this sword. You short-sighted idiots. My lords, do you think this fatty is your companion? What a joke, Tarkus has already planted spies among you. And you still do not know. Luc Besson and the other nobles were dumbfounded. They did not know if Abel was telling the truth. Although the commander of the White Mane army subconsciously believed Brando's words, he still hoped that what Brando said was not true. But Brando had already raised the sword and pierced it into Burnley's ball-shaped body. The latter cried out in pain and his body quickly shriveled up. Then, his appearance quickly changed and he turned into a disgusting shriveled monster. Necromancer. Luc Besson recognized it at first glance. Seeing this, the Golden Apple Lord sat back on his horse and shouted, Impossible! His reaction shocked everyone, and almost everyone turned to look at him. Only Brando's expression was cold. He knew what had happened. History did not change, but he finally understood what happened on this day, and why Fortress Reden fell so quickly. The Golden Apple Lord felt cold sweat dripping down his forehead. Every word that the damn fatty said to him had turned into a vicious trap in his eyes. In order to capture Brando and his men, he had already transferred a third of the castle's guards to Burnley's private soldiers. As for those private soldiers, it was easy to guess what they were. While they were hesitating, they suddenly saw blue flames shooting up to the sky from the west and northwest of Fortress Reeden. There was no need for words. Everyone knew what had happened. At that moment, the Golden Apple Lord could not help but feel dizzy. Retreat, retreat quickly. Go to the east gate. Oh. Chapter 67. Brando watched coldly from the side as the nobles gathered together to argue. The nobles' private soldiers were in a constant state of panic. The nobles wanted to leave the city to the east, but what about their subjects in Fortress Reeden? No one mentioned it. At this moment, no one cared about the political struggles anymore. They were arguing about what to do with their family's assets. Some of them wanted to preserve their lives, while others wanted to bring as much as they could. Some of them would rather die than give up their family's assets, as if Madara would give him a way out because he was a noble. He lowered his head and wiped his sword. That slash had given him 220 EXP, and it was the best reward he had after killing the Golden Tree boss. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha, ha ha ha, ha ha ha, ha ha ha. It seemed like it was a mid-level necromancer, but he was lucky. The necromancer probably didn't expect him to pick it. Necromancers had low strength compared to other necromancers. The level 30 mid-level necromancer was immobilized by the gargoyle, which gave Brando the chance to pick up the loot. A mid-level necromancer had more than that. Brando cut open the necromancer's forehead in front of everyone and took out a piece of bone. He then cut off 4 fingers from the necromancer's right hand and pried open its jaw, carefully picking out its teeth and putting them into his pocket. His shocking actions caused everyone to go silent. They looked at Brando as if they were looking at a demon. Although it was a necromancer, it still had a human form. But Brando's actions were like an experienced hunter handling his prey. However, Brando didn't think there was anything wrong with it, because he was handling his prey anyway. Mid-level necromancers were different from low-level cannon fodder. Their soulfire nodules had a chance to be refined into gems for embedding. The 4 fingers of the right hand that held the staff could be used to cast spells, and their teeth could be used to make paralysis poison. As such, it wasn't wrong to say that their entire body was a treasure. Seal, on the other hand, knew some of the stories, which was why he ran out from the private army and stood respectfully at Brendel's side. The private soldiers of the nobles had been working for money, and their morale had long since dissipated. Naturally, no one would care about him. However, the young wizard couldn't help but recall the scene of Brando testing his sword beside Earl Dun's corpse. Only then did he realize that there was a deeper meaning behind his lord's actions, and he couldn't help but admire him. He looked at Brando and felt that the wise Highland wizards in Karsuk were just as calm as him. On the other hand, Luke Besson had calmed down after a brief moment of absent-mindedness. He grabbed the reins and rode on the horse's back. Unlike the others, he wasn't in a hurry to escape. Instead, he looked at the young man with interest. In his opinion, Brando was calm, quick-witted, and not lacking in decisiveness. At his age, he could be considered powerful. If he had been born 10 years earlier, he would definitely have become a prominent figure. However, even as a member of the royal faction, Erwin could not help but shake his head. He looked up at the dark night and couldn't help but wonder what would happen to the country. For a moment there was silence among them. Only a genius would know that Brendel was trying to figure out which path he should take to escape. He looked at the Shire, who was standing at the side, and couldn't help but ask, "Which one do you think is easier to deal with, the Pale Rider or the Black Warrior?" Charles was stunned by the question that came out of nowhere. For a moment he didn't know how to answer. Brando shook his head and looked at the noisy nobles who finally retreated to the east with their private soldiers. The corpses of their comrades were left messily on the riverbank, and no one cared about them. In his poem, Gobel compared the nobles of Karsuk to bandits. I think Grinwars is not far from that. The Shire sneered. This country is going to be finished. Brando did not care if Luke Besson was beside him and sneered. However, he was not going to argue with a group of people who were about to die. These guys went out from the east and bumped into Tarkus's most capable general, the famous dragon's calamity, Lord Tamara. Brando was wondering why these people would die in history. Now, looking at their stupid decision, it was not that hard to understand. "You're not going to run?" Luc Besson asked as if he did not hear Ren's words. Before Brando could answer, there was a sudden gust of wind in the sky. Everyone looked up instinctively and saw two huge humorous double arms, one in front and one behind. They grew bigger and bigger and roared over their heads. At that moment, everyone present was scared stiff. It was an indescribable feeling. The terrifying yet elegant undead flew across the sky. Purple flames burned between the grayish-black bones, burning out from between the ribs. Every flap of its huge wings produced a heavy gust of wind. As it flew over everyone's heads, the purple flames left a long trail behind. The wind pressure made everyone's scalp numb, as if they heard a piercing scream from the bottom of their hearts. The scream itself was like a long nightmare. It bred the breath of corruption and despair in people's hearts. It was as if white bones were growing out of the dark ground, and the rotten tendons were covered with white maggots. The withered land stretched as far as the eye could see. The sky was gloomy, and one was standing alone in the middle of this gray plain. Brando almost quivered before he recovered from this state of mind. He could not help but exclaim in his heart. This was the aura of fear of the skeletal WIRMS. Just by flying over, it had such a huge impact on the people present. He could not help but look around. He saw the warhorses on the riverbank fleeing in fear, or kneeling on the ground. Then he saw Luc Besson. When the latter realized that Ren had also woken up, he could not help but be stunned. "Come with us, young man. As you can see, the strength of an individual is very small in the face of such a level of power." Brando looked at him and shook his head. He could not trust this guy now. Moreover, in history, Luc Besson was dead. He did not want to touch the bad luck that he had. It was not easy to get to this point. As long as he could escape from this dead city, his plan would be half completed. After that, he could peacefully kill monsters and level up, and then wait for Erwin to reach his end. Brando saw that his good days had just begun. How could he fall into a trap again? He thought for a moment and decided to tell the truth to let the other party know the difficulties and retreat. "I want to break out from the north because my friends are waiting for me there. If General Luc Besson does not mind, you can come with me." Luc Besson stared at him and hesitated for a moment, but in the end he shook his head. Blue flames were burning in the north, northwest and west, indicating that the undead army was invading from that direction. Although he appreciated this young man, he would not sacrifice himself. But Brando did not tell him that at this time, except for the east, the other directions were about the same. But the north was closer. At this time was an advantage. Time was life. He patted the Shire's shoulder and replied, "In that case, we will take our leave first. If fate wills it, I hope we can meet again." In history, although Luc Besson was not much different from ordinary nobles, at least he was a capable person. And he was one of the few people in that era who thought of the concept of a country. Subconsciously, Brando did not mind if he lived. But he looked at the other party and did not say anything unnecessary. He was afraid that he would accidentally remind the other party. Maybe it would not be a problem for a while, but Tiger Luc Besson was not a girl like Freya or the Roman who had not seen the world. If he found something suspicious, who knew what would happen? These days, astrologers were respected by the people, but charlatans were burned at the stake. "I don't want to risk my life for this unnecessary risk." The year of flowers and summer leaves, the 2nd of June. The peace of the past was burned to ashes in the raging fire. Wherever the undead army passed, the land was scorched. Countless people lost their lives, their families were broken, and their families were destroyed. When people found out that praying could not save them, and that the only people they could rely on were the nobles who abandoned them, a long scar was formed. This kind of distrust began to spread from the war zone to the rear. But Brando knew that this was only the first step towards Erwin's end. The news of the fall of Fortress Rieden only reached Fort Vermeer 6 days later. At this time, Tarkus's flanks were already threatening Ankes. The entire Fort Vermeer and Fortress Rieden defense line seemed to have been destroyed in an instant. Only a lonely fortress was left struggling to hold on. On the 11th, news of the undead army in Viro's direction reached Corvado. On the second day, Oberg VII secretly met with Madara's envoy. On the 13th, Seal's Free Merchant Alliance announced their participation in the war. On the 14th, Madara's envoy formally met with Oberg. On the 20th, the front lines stopped fighting. Then both sides formed a diplomatic group, and the war entered a long period of negotiations. But the war continued to move forward at a slow pace. In the first month, the front lines seemed to be struggling in a quagmire. Madara's army fanned the flames everywhere, and Erwin's slow response often caused them to suffer huge losses. However, the royal family was happy to see such a loss. Thus, the negotiations were further delayed. On the 5th of the 7th month, Madara's army entered Randner and met with Seal's mercenaries for the first time. History's Battle of Klingenberg began, and Sursta became famous in this battle. Under the protection of the artillery, the Black Knight under his command tore apart the flanks of Arek's mercenaries time and time again, and finally settled the battle. After that, Madara's army triumphantly advanced, and even reached the capital of Randner at the furthest. In this series of battles in Sursta, Tarkus, Wayland, Ogiest, Greta, and many other young names shone brightly. Only Brando knew what these names meant in the future. But history continued to move forward. On the 16th of the 7th month, Oberg VII once again met with Madara's envoy. 3 days later, the negotiations finally came to an end, and the First War of the Black Rose came to an end. However, this war started like lightning and ended like lightning. It was as if nothing had happened, but also as if everything had already happened. The only result of the war seemed to be Erwin's expected defeat time and time again. There was nothing else worth mentioning. But after that, for a period of 10 years, Bucci no longer belonged to the people who once loved that land. P.S. I was too excited to see Haysi that I forgot the time. Tragedy. When the big picture of Haysi comes out, should I give you guys a big celebration? Chapter 68. Looking back at the year of summer leaves and flowers, the second day of the 6th lunar month. With the bar owner's daughter Sue leading the way, Freya quickly arrived at Panyuan Market number 51. She looked outside. Even though it was early in the morning, there were still many people in Fortress Reden's largest market. There were braziers lit up near and far, and the bright light made people feel more or less at ease. Just as she was about to walk out, the girl called Sue grabbed her hand. "Don't go, there are people hiding in the alley." The girl with braids stood at the intersection of light and darkness at the corner of the street. She had one hand on the wall as she stared vigilantly outside. "Are they the guards?" Freya was shocked. "I don't know, but there are 2 unfamiliar faces there. They are definitely not from this area." Sue shook her head and replied quietly. Freya put the sword hilt to her lips and hesitated nervously. The people who appeared in Panyuan Market at this time were most likely the White Mane soldiers. She also expected that they would find Hood. I wonder if they've ever met each other before? Should she go up and knock on the door? The future goddess of war furrowed her brows and suddenly remembered Brendel's words. "Don't worry if you find traces of the army. Before they know our relationship, they will not act rashly and alert the enemy. They also want to have a chance to catch us all." Thinking until here, Freya took a deep breath. She turned around and asked, "Sue, can you answer some of my questions?" "What?" "Let me ask you. Do you know how to tell if a person is lying?" The dark-skinned girl smiled. "Is it because I often help out at the bar?" Freya's face reddened when her thoughts were seen through. She had taken a liking to Su Yuan's rich experience and knowledge compared to her. When she talked to Su before, she and everyone else naively thought that the nobles would save them, but Su only needed a few sentences to point out the nature of the matter. Thus, in her heart, this cold girl was an extremely sharp and opinionated girl. "It's okay, I occasionally help others as well." Sue smiled. "Freya, look at me." "Ah, what's the name of your friend who said Fortress Reden would be breached?" Freya was startled. She didn't know why the girl in front of her would suddenly ask this question. She panicked and her eyes couldn't help but flicker. "Boo Brando." Sue's eyes moved. "You have a good impression of him, right?" No, Brando, he likes Roman people." Look at me, Freya." Su Ping looked at Freya. His dark brown eyes were as calm as still water. "Who is the Roman?" Freya's face seemed to be on fire. How could she still dare to look at Su? Her eyes roamed about uncertainly. She wanted to explain, but she didn't know where to start. She felt that she was the #1 idiot in the world, and it was the kind that was not discounted. For a moment, she just wanted to find a hole to hide in. Understood? Sue asked. Yes, I understand. Freya lowered her head and nodded. She took a deep breath, grabbed her sword, and was about to leave when she suddenly turned around and grabbed Sue's arm. Sue, can you wait for me here? Sue was surprised, but he still nodded. Freya was confused, but she felt that Sue was like Brando by her side, giving her some confidence. Then she walked out of the alley, pretending that she didn't care about the gazes around her. She went straight to number 51 of the Panuo market. She raised her hand. After a moment of hesitation, Freya felt at least 2 sharp gazes on her back. But in the end she still knocked on the door. Bang bang bang. The knocking sound seemed to come from her heart. Freya waited for a moment before the door creaked open. A man with a crooked back and a bald head appeared behind the door. It was hard to tell his age. When he saw Freya, he was obviously stunned, and his eyes shrunk back subconsciously. After you find the woolen merchant called Hood, don't reveal your identity. Give him a time and ask him to meet us at the bar. You have to pay attention to his reaction, and you will know if he is reliable. Freya, look at me. Freya immediately caught the subtle change in expression. Brando and Sue's words rang in her mind at the same time, and her heart turned cold. Who are you? Why are you looking for me? The short man was stunned for a moment before he asked. Freya was silent for about a second. She just looked at him coldly. Then, when the short man couldn't help but want to retreat, she suddenly pulled out her sword and placed it on his neck. Her eyes darkened slightly. In the blink of an eye, when the situation suddenly changed, Sue saw several people on the street subconsciously move. But they quickly calmed down and returned to their initial state. Their movements were very subtle, and only the girl hiding at the corner of the street saw it all. Freya was completely unaware of what had happened behind her. She just held her sword as calmly as possible and said in a flat tone, Are you the witch's accomplice? Don't kill me. They force me, witch? The short man was frightened by the sudden change and sat on the ground. Then, he realized what the cold-faced ponytailed girl in front of him had asked. Freya could only think of Brando's wizard retainer, the young man called the Shire, who had said, Your aunt knows a lot. This is a secret passed down among the wizards in this world. There is a book called The Epic of Darkness, which tells of things that happened in the past countless years. But that doesn't necessarily apply to people who are related to magic. Some of the witches in the countryside also know some rumors about this. In fact, before she drew her sword, she didn't think that she could adapt so quickly, or it should be said that her mind was in a state of emptiness. She said coldly, You should call her Jenny. Forget it, it doesn't matter. I'll teach you a lesson first. As she spoke, she raised her sword, and the textile merchant called Hood immediately cried out in fear. Wait, my lady, I have nothing to do with her. No, it's not nothing, I mean I'm not her accomplice. I mean I'm just an ordinary relative of hers, no, a distant relative. Oh, it's true. Believe me, she only comes to the city occasionally to collect goods. That witch, yes, witch. Indeed, she would accept some strange things. That's right. She lives in Bucci with her niece. Freya looked at the man and suppressed the disgust in her heart. She lifted him up. But my informant told me that she entered the city a few days ago. You better not lie to me. As a wizard, I can extract your memories at any time. The merchant was already paralyzed with fear with the sword on his neck. He didn't understand the problem in Freya's words. I'll talk. She left Fortress Reden 2 days ago and went to the north. Freya looked at his eyes and threw him away in disgust. She took a small breath and heard Sue whistling at the corner of the alley. She knew that her big movement had attracted the attention of those people, and she had to leave quickly. But she didn't expect that Aunt Jenny wasn't here. She went to the north? Braggs was in the north, why would she go there? But it didn't seem like this person was lying. She clenched her teeth and hesitated for a moment. The afternoon sun shone through the arched windows of the castle, brightening up the room that was decorated with soft colors. A young girl in a silver princess dress was sitting at a small round table in the Rococo style. She was leaning against a high-backed chair in a standard posture. Her slender hand was holding a cup of black tea, and her other hand was holding a silver spoon. She was motionless, and her soft silver-gray eyes were staring ahead as if she was absorbed in a story. She had a head of beautiful silver curly hair, and her half-pointed ears peeked out from the curls. She was Oberg the Seventh's most beloved daughter, and was recognized as the #1 beauty in Aween. If it was in Brando's era, both players and NPCs would call her the Regent Princess. If there was anyone in Erewhon who could compare to the goddess of war, then it would be this young princess. You're a smart little girl. Everyone in the Everton family is outstanding. After a while, the princess put down her teacup and quietly asked, and then Lord Oberway. If Brando was here, he would definitely recognize the cold-faced middle-aged man standing in front of her. This was the Earl Dunn who had his throat slit by his sword. But in fact, in the capital's noble circle, there were not many people who knew this count, but in comparison, he had a more well-known nickname, the Duke of Chambord. Wolf Baron Oberway, one of His Majesty's close ministers, and one of the core leaders of the royal faction. He had a good relationship with Everton and Woodrow. Oberway looked at the princess and knew that she wasn't simple. But she was the apple of His Majesty's eye, and he didn't dare to be perfunctory. This time, he borrowed the name of Dunn from the Lewis Bowman family to go to Fortress Reedon. Both of them were connoisseurs, and they had a similar hobby of collecting. Although they didn't look alike, it wasn't a big problem in this era where information was scarce. He was going to Fortress Reedon to do something for Oberg the Seventh, a secret mission. When he thought of this, he realized that the princess was asking him a question and said, "Of course, the daughter of Earl Everton is at least as outstanding as her father, but it's a pity." He wanted to say it was a pity that she was a woman, but he suddenly realized that the person in front of him was the princess who was known as the crown of the royal family, so he quickly swallowed the second half of his sentence. The girl obviously knew what he wanted to say, but she didn't ask. She only changed the topic. "But Lord Oberway, I have some doubts about your story. You purposely went to find trouble with that young man, but it seems unnecessary." Oberway thought to himself that it would be strange if she didn't understand, but he still replied respectfully, "I'm just worried about his intentions." A Highland knight and his squire appeared in Fortress Reedon beside Everton's daughter. "Your Highness, you know that the White Knight in Karsuk and your father are not on the same side." "I know, but they didn't object." "That's right, that's why I want to test him. After all, he's just a shadow. Compared to Karsuk, I can still tell which is more important. For the sake of His Majesty, I don't mind giving it a try." Oberway replied, "I thank you on behalf of my father, Lord Oberway." The princess thought that her father and this fellow wanted to make Karsuk prosper, but would they succeed? She could guess their intentions, but they were just making things up. She thought for a while and decided that the recommendation for the Basta Royal Cavalry Academy might need to be increased. She wanted to remind him of something, but after thinking about her identity, she decided not to. In the end, she said, "And then Lord Oberway, I want to continue listening to the rest of the story. Before my history class starts, I still have time to listen to 2 or 3 sections of your story." "Of course, it would be my pleasure." Chapter 69. Oberway took out a necklace from his bosom before he started his story. It was a very common brass necklace, and there was a beautiful crystal pendant on the polished chain. There was a small line of words written on it, Freya. He showed the necklace to the girl and said, "This necklace is something that she always carries around with her. That's how her name came about. However, this is actually her mother's name, Your Highness." "Her mother?" The girl held the necklace with her slender hand. Her expression did not change. "Everton's wife, who died in the riot 17 years ago. Then this girl should be the only descendant of Everton, right?" "That's right. Since Lord Oberway is here, then this girl should have successfully escaped from danger. Can I say that?" the girl asked. "You can say that, but the process was a little strange." The middle-aged man nodded coldly, but his eyebrows raised slightly as if he thought of something interesting. "Oh." The princess was slightly surprised. "Actually, it's mainly about that young man." "So it's back to him?" "No, it's just that the young man played a mysterious role in the entire process." It sounds like a light sentence, but in fact, the entire escape journey was full of unpredictability. There were a few times when the situation was so critical that even I couldn't intervene. Many people couldn't even imagine that kind of situation, but he still forcefully brought it back. Oberwei could not help but sneer at this point. To put it bluntly, compared to some incompetent people, this young man is probably the only one who could make Madara suffer in this battle. Oh! The girl's silver-gray eyes lit up slightly. Especially when he obtained something good in the process. The middle-aged man could not help but reminisce. But as for what it is, please allow this old man to keep you in suspense. Now that you mention it, I'm even more interested. What kind of person is this young man that even Lord Oberwei can't stop praising? However, there's not much time left, so please begin, my lord. Oberwei nodded, took a step back and continued to narrate the events that happened that night. Freya heard Su whistling from the corner of the street. It was clear and melodious, like the sound of a nightingale, but it was a warning. She quickly turned around and saw 4 or 5 strangers on the street surrounding her. She knew that her actions were a little too big and had attracted their hostility. Without thinking, she pushed away the Roman relative and rushed into the house. The people behind her quickened their pace, but Freya had already rushed into the bedroom, closed the door, and overturned the cupboard to block the passageway. Freya felt as if her heart was about to jump out of her chest. She looked at the window, gritted her teeth, and jumped out of the window with both hands covering her head. Most of the commoners in Awin were still using wooden windows at this time of the year. Even though she had the protection of the half-plate of the Wind Empress, Freya's arms and forehead still hurt from the impact. She rolled a few times on the ground and found herself in an alley behind the street. She raised her head and looked left and right, just in time to see Su stumbling into the alley from the other side. But the girl's face was pale as if she had seen a ghost. Su! Freya stood up and shouted, but the rest of the sentence was stuck in her throat. She raised her head and looked at the specks of blue light moving towards the center of the sky. At first, the girl did not realize what it was. She stood there in a daze for a while, but then she realized that it was an arrow. Arrows ignited with soulfire. The masterpiece of Madara's skeleton archers. The experience of that night in Buchi surfaced in her mind. Freya shouted for him to be careful, and pounced over to protect Su under her body. The rain of arrows immediately came crashing down, and countless arrows smashed into the tiles of the houses nearby. The thin layer of tiles could not stop the cone-shaped arrows made by Madara at all, and soon screams could be heard from within the houses. Freya felt Su hugging herself and shivering on the ground. In fact, she was not much better. Her face was pale, and she felt as if her heart was about to stop. Several arrows hit the green feathers of wind around her body and bounced off. Freya did not know that the defense of the half-plate of the Wind Empress in the game was terrifying. The half-plate of the Wind Empress provided 3 points of protection, while the half-plate itself provided 2 points. In reality, the half-plate's defense was only 3 points. Therefore, she always thought that she would die in the next second. She was so scared that she closed her eyes tightly, but her body still did not move to protect the girl below. About a minute later, after 2 waves of arrows rained down, the crackling sounds in the surroundings finally became sparse. Su and Freya trembled and opened their eyes together. They looked at each other and saw the lingering fear in each other's eyes. The skeleton outside, Su said with some difficulty in breathing. Freya was slightly startled and then her heart sank. She knew that Madara's army had entered the city. She never doubted that Brando would lie to her, but she did not expect it to be so fast. Now she understood why he had been deliberately asking for time. The future goddess of war got up, grabbed Su's hand and pulled her up. Su, let's go. Where to? Su asked, not knowing what to do. Run. Leave this place. Let's leave this place together. Freya's heart was in a mess. She finally understood how much pressure Brando was under. She thought about it again and again, and could only take one step at a time and wait until she saw Brando. I want to go back. My father is still in the shop. I'll go with you. Su nodded. The Bonoan market was on the west side of Fortress Reden, close to the Pine River. The Red Copper Dragon Story Club was on the north street between the Bonoan market and the Traveler's Bridge. But when Freya and Su arrived, the street and the bar were already crowded with people because of the burning fire at the west gate. Since the fire at the Parliament of Nobles and the frequent movements of the guards, it was already a chaotic night. Therefore, people were already whispering to each other, asking each other what happened. Some of them thought that the army of Madara had arrived at the city, and some thought that the nobles in the city were attacking them. But they did not expect that the army of the undead had already entered the city. Freya and Sue separated the crowd and found that the owner of the Red Copper Dragon Story Club and his guests had already run outside and were pointing at the west gate that was on fire. As soon as Sue saw her father, she rushed to him like a swallow returning to the forest. His daughter's action made the owner of the bar, Reto, slightly stunned. He patted the girl's back to calm her down, but the latter tiptoed and whispered something in his ear. Reto's eyes darkened. He first looked at Freya and nodded to her to show his gratitude. Then, he turned to the group of mercenaries beside him. Freya noticed that most of these people were his guests. Reto clapped his hands and asked them to stop and look at him. Someone even joked, "What's wrong, old Reto? Are you going to treat us to a drink because of the fireworks?" Everyone applauded loudly, but the bar owner replied, "It's not impossible to treat us to a drink, but not today. Everyone listen up, Madara has entered the city." When he said that Madara had entered the city for the first time, these people did not understand and only reacted after a few seconds. Then Reto added again, and more than 30 people at the scene quieted down. Was this true? Now this sentence was clearly written on everyone's face. "Sue told me. She wouldn't lie to me," Reto said frankly. Freya frowned slightly. Most people would not discuss this news in public because even she knew that it might cause panic. But unless Reto did not consider this issue, or he had his own plans, the possibility of the future Valkyrie seeing the latter was much higher. It took some time to digest the news, and then someone asked with some difficulty, "What should we do?" It seemed that everyone present prioritized such a question, instead of turning around and running away as soon as they heard the news or shouting. Freya carefully looked at these people's reactions, and suddenly realized that the relationship between the bar and its regulars was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. "Let's fight our way out. Everyone, let's fight our way out," someone suggested. "But how do we fight our way out?" someone asked. Since Madara attacked from the west gate, in the eyes of most people, the east gate, which was the furthest, should be the safest place. But the mercenaries were people who came out of the battlefield, and most of them had some basic tactical knowledge. Erwin's siege focused on attacking from 3 sides and 1 side, but the key factor was whether it was a surprise attack or a siege. And Madara's tactical purpose was also very important. Were the undead here to kill people, seize the city, plunder, or to attack further targets? This was also a big difficulty in the war between the Light World and Madara, because it was difficult for the living to determine what the undead wanted to do and what tactical intentions they had. For a while there were different opinions, but no one could come up with a way to convince the crowd. Freya waited anxiously for a while, her hand holding the sword raised again and again. Finally she recklessly said, I think I know a person who can lead you out of the city." Her words silenced everyone present and turned to look at her. Someone recognized her and whistled. "Isn't that the little girl just now?" Freya blushed in front of everyone. She did not expect to say it out loud. She could not help but think that she had made the decision on behalf of Brando. Would Brando blame her? She suddenly realized that she was afraid of this, but she calmed down and thought about it. From Brando's point of view, he had always been looking for help. In this case, as long as these people were gathered into a useful force, it would be enough. But how was he going to gather all these people? When it came to this, the future goddess of war was a little hesitant. Could she do it well? As a mere militia captain, he had to think of ways to command these experienced mercenaries who had gone through life and death on the battlefield. But Freya quickly calmed down. At most it was just a try. The girl thought as she held her sword tightly and nervously held it in front of her chest. She looked a little reserved like a young girl, and the others could only look at Reto. The latter introduced her. "This is the young lady who saved my daughter." "Then young lady, how can we trust you?" someone asked from the back. "It's here." Freya took a deep breath. "Of course you can trust me. Do you know why the guards wanted to capture me and my companions?" "Why?" "Because we are Butchi's militia. 2 days ago, the place was invaded by Madara. My companions and I escaped from Madara's clutches to report to Fortress Reden, but the noble's response disappointed us." She paused for a moment. "I don't think you expect those people to save you, right?" "Of course, those maggots." "Maggots? That's a good description. Cheers." "Cheers." The crowd responded. You mean you have a way to avoid Madara's attention? Reto looked at her and asked. Freya nodded. Author's note. When the 4th generation heavy destroyer appeared out of nowhere, I also exploded it. Also, there are some people who are discussing how to write these chapters. I'm just doing an exercise, so please forgive me. Also, I won't use this method often. It's just an experiment. This book has just started, so please don't mind. Also, who knows if it will explode tomorrow. Chapter 70. You're saying that you have a way to avoid Madara's attention? After a moment of silence, the bar owner asked with obvious distrust. Freya quickly nodded, but she was immediately startled when she realized that everyone did not seem to trust her. She tightened her grip on her sword as if she was trying to vent her nervousness through her pale fingers. Freya is part of Butchie's militia, and one of her friends said that Fortress Reeden would be breached. Before tonight, no one would believe it. Sue also did not believe it, but the truth is right in front of us. I think that Freya's words make sense. At this time, Sue suddenly spoke. Everyone was startled, and even Freya looked at the girl with weak-colored skin and braided hair. She gave her a grateful glance. I actually do not have a way to lead you to avoid Madara's attention. Freya thought for a moment before speaking frankly to the mercenaries. Her opening words made everyone stunned. But I know someone who has the ability. So you're not sure? One of them asked. Freya nodded. She immediately saw many of them shrugging their shoulders. These mercenaries did not have much hope in this little girl, and they were just joking. After all, Freya herself was not annoying, and could even be said to be a very attractive girl. Wait, everyone. I know that as a stranger, it's ridiculous for me to ask all of you to believe me. She placed her sword in front of her chest and slowly relaxed. Her voice became clear and bright. So, I'm just suggesting a possibility. She thought for a moment. It's like a bet. A bet, I. The ponytailed girl thought for a long time, but could not find a suitable word. She suddenly felt a little annoyed. Perhaps she should not have used a method that she was not familiar with to pander to these mercenaries. It's like you open a bet and we place our bets, right? Then life and death will be decided by fate, and riches and honor will be decided by the heavens. A tall mercenary laughed. That's easy to explain. Hello, I'm Mano. Just based on what you said, I have to place my bets, right? He turned his head. Someone in the crowd immediately laughed kindly and someone shouted, Mano, you damn gambler, you'll lose your life sooner or later. Freya blushed and quickly nodded. That's about it. If you think my words are trustworthy, why don't you take a look first? I think when you see my friend, you'll be able to make a judgment. At least I believe him. After she finished speaking, the mercenaries became silent. Freya's words were very tempting, and with Sue's words they were hesitating. Wouldn't it be better for them to follow her and see the situation? In any case, they wouldn't suffer any losses. At worst, they could just break up. But no one dared to take the lead. Freya could not help but feel anxious when she saw the atmosphere slowly turning cold. I believe Freya. Sue was the first to walk out. She even looked back at her father. Reto could not help but scratch his head. He had no choice but to follow his daughter's stand. Really, his daughter's elbow was always on the side of an outsider. But at least she had hooked him a good young man. The bar owner could not help but sigh, and the people around him laughed. Okay, Reto said. Don't laugh. Since I'm going, you can stay and watch. I believe you still have to give face to my little daughter, right? You're so shameless, Reto. How can you use Miss Sue as a shield? Shameless. The mercenaries could not help but shout, but they all agreed with Reto's words. On the other hand, the fat bar owner was not ashamed at all. Instead, he looked proud. In the end, there were more than 20 people left. In fact, these people were not uninterested in Freya's proposal, but they could not bring themselves to compromise with a little girl. So, miss, we're all here. Now let's talk about your request. Reto folded his arms and asked. After all, mercenaries were mercenaries. They understood that there was no such thing as enjoying power without paying a price. They generally regarded this price as a business deal. They believed that if they agreed, they would join. If they did not agree, they would leave. It was that simple. It was not something difficult to talk about. Freya did not understand the mercenaries' thoughts. She was naturally nervous. My request is actually very simple. I want you to escape from here alive. Since you choose to stay and believe in me, I hope you can listen to my command and obey my orders. Otherwise, this agreement is basically meaningless. So I know it's a little presumptuous to say this, but I still have to insist. If you think it's unacceptable, I won't force you. Of course, this is the most basic. The mercenaries replied. Of course, that was what they said. However, when faced with an order to die, they might not necessarily carry it out. However, it was always right to agree first. What else? What can you do? I don't know, but I can at least stand by your side and fight. In the battle, we are comrades who fight side by side. I think this will not change because of the agreement between us. Freya thought about it and replied. This sentence is enough as long as you can do it. At least we will acknowledge you, little girl. Mano replied, and 2 or 3 people nodded in agreement. But there were still people who chose to leave. In the end, there were 17 people left. Except for Reto, Su, Mano, and his 3 best friends, the rest were lone wolves. They felt that it was better to follow the group than to act alone, so they finally chose to stay. However, these people were beyond Freya's expectations. It was far beyond her expectations, because she did not have much to expect. Even if Su was the only one who stayed, it would be lucky. And now it was even more lucky. Before their discussion came to an end, the news of Madara's army entering the city came from the west, and the crowd on the street began to stir. When Reto saw the situation on the street, he immediately asked the others to follow him to the bar to get food. At this time it was natural to take as much as they could. Otherwise, when these people woke up, the street would be in chaos. This was the difference between mercenaries and Freya's militia. Experienced soldiers would always think of logistics first and not other aspects. Then what should we do next, Commander Miss Freya? The old mercenary Mano asked. Don't call me Commander. I'm no different from you, Freya said with a red face. Her previous speech made her so nervous that she almost couldn't breathe. Until now, she still did not understand why she had the courage to say such words in front of a group of experienced soldiers. Now that she thought about it, it was like a dream. But there was a voice in her heart that told her that she could do it. She must have a way to help Brando and not be a burden by his side. The ponytailed girl took a deep breath to calm herself down. She stared at the blazing west gate and suddenly remembered something. Do you know how to ride a horse? Of course, how can we not? Then we will steal a horse later, Freya replied. Steal a horse? Steal a horse? The girl fiddled with the silver spoon and asked curiously. There is a horse market in Fortress Reden. The nobles trade war horses in the inner district, and they also sell servants and slaves. This is a public fact. In fact, when I came to Bucci, it was them who sent me the news. Audiobook replied. These daring bastards. The princess calmly put down her teacup. But how did that girl know? She asked again. This is related to her background. That year, our people left her at the horse market in Fortress Reden when she was 3 years old. She might not remember the things that happened before she was 3 years old, but she should have a deep impression of that place. You guys are really heartless. How could you leave a 3-year-old girl alone in a strange place? We had no choice. That year the chaos involved too many people. Even Everton's wife was not spared. Besides, we've made thorough arrangements. She knows how to ride a horse. How could someone from the Everton family not know how to ride a horse? We arranged for her to be adopted by an elite knight from the Silver Wing Legion. But why did her family move out of Fortress Reden to such a remote place like Bucci? We still don't know. Did she succeed? Although she knew that Audiobook's words meant that Freya had succeeded, she still couldn't help but ask. But the princess still couldn't help but ask. No matter how mature she looked on the surface, she was still a 15-year-old girl in her heart. Of course, as I said before, the nobles were all attracted by that young man. The market didn't have any defenses, so they easily succeeded. Those mercenaries were also quite strong, at least comparable to the soldiers of the kingdom's frontline legions. The princess nodded. Different from the other legions, the frontline legions of the kingdom of Erewhon, such as the Royal Guards, the Silver Wing Legion, Cypher's 11th Cavalry Division, and Anric's Flintlock Regiment, were still in possession of their former glory and battle prowess. The normal soldiers in these legions were still below the iron rank, 3 to 7 ounces. They were naturally incomparable to the White Mane Legion and the Black Blade Legion. As for the standard legions, they were even more unsightly. Since the year of the cave beasts, their battle prowess was no different from the nobles' private soldiers. Thus, when Audiobook described them, the half-fairy princess immediately understood the strength of those mercenaries who were with Freya. She thought for a moment and asked, And then there is the most exciting part of the story. When Miss Freya led her knight to meet up with that mysterious young man, they slaughtered their way through Madara's army. Even though Audiobook was usually cold, when he talked about slaughtering his way through the enemy's army, he, as a member of the royal faction, was exhilarated. What a mysterious young man, the princess said. Audiobook coughed twice and realized that he had misspoken, but the princess didn't mind. She looked at the time and said, I still have some time, Lord Audiobook. Please continue with the next part. It's my honor. Chapter 71. The news of Madara's army entering the city spread like a plague in Fortress Reden. For thousands of years, the Dark Kingdom across the Pine Mountain Range was described as a place of evil. Undead, bandits, and occasional invasions, it was as if Erwin's misfortune was brought about by the other side. Thus, the nobles maintained their unchanging rule for hundreds of years, and the villagers trained themselves, ready to fight at any time. And now this enemy that seemed to have always existed in legends and stories not only appeared on paper, but also came to life, baring its fangs and wanting to devour people. But the citizens of Fortress Reden realized, where were the nobles? Where was the army of Fortress Reden? As Brando walked, he saw more and more people coming out of their houses. He heard bits and pieces of information from the other escapees, and they hurriedly ran back into their houses, bringing their luggage and family members, and headed towards the north gate. More and more people came, and in the end it formed a huge stream of people. In the eyes of the young man, the huge crowd seemed to form a gray oil painting. In the painting there were old people, children, men, women, even mules, horses and carriages, dragging their families as they moved forward hesitantly. The children held onto the hands of the adults, their faces filled with curiosity. The women leaned on their men, their pale faces filled with nervousness. In the huge stream of people, not many people spoke, and only the sound of the huge group moving forward could be heard. Because there was no one to maintain order, the stream of people collided with each other. Some people mixed in with the crowd and wanted to take advantage of the chaos. Soon, a carriage in front of them collapsed in the middle of the road, and the people moving forward slowly became stuck in the middle of the road. The people started to argue, and it quickly turned into a standoff. The people at the back cursed loudly, and an inexplicable panic began to spread among the crowd. When Brando and the Shire found the Roman, this happened at the same time, and he ordered the coachman to drive the carriage to the side of the road. Then, he and the Shire sat on the left and right of the carriage, guarding the sides of the carriage, and calmly looked at the chaos that was spreading on the street. Brando, you're finally here. I was so worried. The merchant girl let out a sigh of relief. Her round-toed boots were rubbing against the wooden planks of the carriage. She was a little nervous. There were too many people on the way, so we were delayed. Brando pulled out his sword and answered, Where's Freya? I don't know, let's wait and see. The Shire watched indifferently from the side for a while. Suddenly he whispered to his lord, My lord, someone is stirring up trouble in the crowd. What's in it for them? Brando was stunned. He didn't understand because he had never paid attention to the actions of these civilian NPCs in the game. He wasn't a behaviorist. I just want to see the world in chaos. Why? Because they subconsciously know that only chaos will benefit them. Ambitious people will not be willing to be lonely, my lord. Some people naturally hope for chaos, but they don't usually have that opportunity. Now the opportunity has come. Charles stared at the people outside and said coldly, Even at this time of the year they don't want to live? Brando came from the modern world, so he knew a little about the bad habits of humans. However, this didn't mean anything. As the only social creature with high intelligence, the behavior of a certain portion of humans as a whole only meant that humans had this attribute. This was the first time he saw such strife between people of the same class, just because of ambition. He saw the chaos in the crowd gradually expand. Some people were pushing and shoving between the fallen carriage, and soon, the cries of children could be heard. The panic obviously deepened. Rumors of Madara's army appearing in the vicinity began to spread among the crowd. The more it spread, the more confident it became. The people who were far away were considering whether to turn around and leave. This hesitation quickly affected more people around them. The street became chaotic. Even at this time of the year, my lord. My teacher once said that madness makes people bold. Hysteria and a little ambition are enough to make these people unite. The county pointed at the group of people who were ready to move. When I was learning magic in Karsuk, my teacher built a tower between black rocks. There, the apprentices not only learned how to cast spells, but also how to manipulate human nature. Brando nodded. The way the wizards in Karsuk learned was similar, but also different from the wizards in Buga. The wizards in Buga wore milky white robes and walked on the white marble floor. Compared to the mysterious witchcraft in other areas, they were more like academies, nobles, or rulers among the wizards. What do they want? Romaine asked curiously. Plunder, rob, and use violence to obtain things that they wouldn't dare to dream of. For example, a beautiful lady like you. Don't say that. I won't thank you. Romaine's face was red from the compliment, and her small eyebrows were raised. In the hustle and bustle, the riot finally broke out. No one knew who made the first move, but in a moment many people began to attack others. More people took this opportunity to squeeze forward. In the crowd, many families were separated, and those who were pushed to the ground did not have the chance to stand up. For a moment, shouts, cries, and screams filled the air. Brando silently watched the scene from the side. He was powerless to stop it, and could only ask the coachman to move the carriage to the side. However, this action of his attracted the attention of others. Some of the people who caused the disturbance noticed him, and when they saw Roman on the carriage, their eyes couldn't help but emit a greedy light. Most of these people were vagrants, youths, mercenaries, and lawless adventurers who had nothing to do on the streets. They had a common language and even relied on tacit understanding to connect with each other. They pushed the people in front of them away and unintentionally approached Brando's side. Brando saw this and frowned. He subconsciously switched his sword to the other hand, and the Roman and the Shire on the side also became nervous. Young man, it's not good for you to occupy a carriage by yourself, especially at this time of the year. Let me hitch a ride. Soon, a mercenary wearing a dirty leather armor grabbed the railing of the wind lantern on the carriage and wanted to squeeze in without any explanation. Get down! Brando moved his sword over and placed it on the mercenary's neck. I just want to hitch a ride. Young man, you're not going to kill me, are you? The mercenary did not expect Brando to be so unyielding, and could not help but be startled. He stopped and put one foot on the steps of the carriage. He looked at Brando with a malicious gaze and shouted, You nobles abandoned us at the crucial moment and ran away. Now you just want to hitch a ride, you selfish people. If you have the ability, kill me. Many people surrounded the mercenary and looked at Brando with a provocative gaze. But most of them were looking at the Roman with a covetous look. Brando! The merchant girl was finally afraid and could not help but use her slender hand to grab Brando's arm. Brando turned around and patted her hand. Then he turned back and said to the mercenary with a disgusted attitude, See, there are women in this carriage. She doesn't welcome you, you can leave. Brando's unyielding attitude obviously angered the other party. The mercenary cursed and wanted to force his way into the carriage. The people who were watching from the back also tried to swarm in. They seemed to be sure that Brando was just a young noble, and would not dare to do anything to them in this situation. My lord, don't. Before the Shire could finish his sentence, he was stunned to see Brando coldly pull back his sword and stab it into the mercenary's chest. Brando then kicked him off the carriage. The mercenary had a look of disbelief on his face. He did not believe that Brando would dare to kill him, but Brando used the facts to tell him, Don't even think about killing me. I'm not someone who is easy to talk to. Although he was no different from a normal person, he was soft-hearted and could not bear to see others in a miserable situation. But when it came to his bottom line, Brando was a decisive person and would never be soft-hearted. Just like the first time he killed someone in Yusong Castle, although he still felt disgusted after the incident, he did not hesitate to kill. The mercenary's corpse fell to the ground with a heavy thud. The people around him subconsciously took a step back. They were shocked by Brando's indifference to human life, but they quickly recovered. They were the ones who had more people. Damned noblemen killing people on the street. Someone immediately shouted. Yeah, we just wanted to hitch a ride. These bastards have no regard for human life. They have never put us commoners in their eyes. We are not even human in their eyes. Those people slowly surrounded the carriage and tried to confuse right and wrong, loudly encouraging the people around them. Show him who's boss. Drag him down from the carriage. Kill him. Most people did not know the truth most of the time. They only believed what they heard and saw. Soon, a large group of people gathered around the carriage. The Shire and the Roman were worried. They could see that the situation was not good. Brando sat on the side of the carriage with his hand on his sword. He did not say a word and only looked at these people coldly. Soon, another person took the lead and rushed forward. This person thought that the noble youth would at least restrain himself in front of so many people. But he was wrong. Brando did not say a word and directly pierced his throat with his sword, causing him to fall down while holding his throat in horror. The young man's sword not only shocked those rascals, but also caused an uproar in the surrounding crowd. But Brando stood up and jumped down from the carriage. His jump made everyone around him retreat. Brando stood in the middle of these people and looked at them coldly. He held his sword with one hand and suddenly swung it over the heads of these people. A gust of sword wind brushed past the top of these people's heads, and they only felt a slight chill on their heads. Then, apart from the falling hair, a nearly 10 feet long crack suddenly appeared on the roof of a building not far away with a whoosh sound. Everyone turned around and stared at the crack with their mouths agape. Take care of yourselves. Brando coldly left these words. He sheathed his sword and climbed back into the carriage. In fact, compared to wasting time on these people, he was more concerned about Freya. Why hadn't she appeared yet? But the Roman was looking at him with stars in her eyes. You're so strong, Brando. The merchant lady praised. Killing people is not a skill, especially when these people are just commoners. Brando shook his head. But only you will protect me. Brando paused for a moment then smiled. P.S. Sorry, I was scrolling through the 4th generation's news on the forum and fell asleep. Chapter 72. No matter what, in a countryside like Fortress Reden, Brendel's sword strike was truly shocking. It was enough to shock everyone who had ulterior motives, and even made them feel as if their throats were stuck, and they could only stand obediently by the side. Although the streets were still crowded, everyone understood that the person in the carriage was not someone to be trifled with. They tacitly kept a distance from the carriage. The 2 unlucky corpses were placed under the carriage. The young man did not say what to do with them, so no one dared to do anything and could only pretend that they did not see anything. Moreover, the 2 corpses were a deterrent. The people who came later looked at the corpses and then looked at the carriage that seemed to be isolated from the rest of the world. They immediately understood where they should go and where they should not. Brando, who was sitting in the carriage, was also worried. He was thinking where Freya was and why she was not here yet. But he did not show his worry on his face. He turned his head and looked outside. At this time, a group of fierce-looking people came up from behind the carriage. Those who blocked their way were pushed to the side, and those who resisted were beaten up. It's true that trouble comes one after another. Brendel furrowed his brows and placed one hand on his sword vigilantly. Who are they? The Shire looked outside and asked. Merchants from the city. The coachman was scared at first. When Brando pulled out his sword to kill, he was so scared that he wanted to abandon the carriage and run away. But now, he realized that the more powerful this person was, the higher his chances of survival. Seems like they are also bullies. Brendel looked at the expressions of these people, then at the coachman's face that clearly did not care, but did not dare to say a word, and he knew who these people were. Your peers don't seem to be good people, little Roman. He turned his head and said, It's fine. The little Roman sat beside him with an expression that said, I am safe. As they spoke, the group of people came close to the carriage. At first, they seemed to want to take Brando's carriage, but when they saw the 2 corpses outside, their faces changed. They were different from the people from before. These merchants and their guards knew who they could bully and who they shouldn't provoke. They hesitated for a moment and then continued to push forward. But these guards were used to being bullies and did not hold back in the face of danger. Very quickly, many people were pushed to the side of Brando's carriage. Very quickly, a middle-aged man was pushed and stumbled over. His head hit the carriage's wheel and blood flowed out. "Father!" A young and panicked voice sounded from the crowd. The middle-aged man snorted and actually climbed up with the help of the carriage. He charged straight at the guard who had pushed him. The guard was caught off guard and was knocked into the crowd by the middle-aged man. The crowd was in an uproar. The middle-aged man immediately turned and ran into the crowd. He pulled the little boy with one hand and turned to run. But how could the guard's accomplices allow him to be presumptuous here? He had just found his son when those people pounced on him from behind and pressed him to the ground. "Let go of my father." The little boy was anxious. He cried and pushed away the guard that pressed on the middle-aged man. But how could he have the ability to do so? He was pushed aside by the guard. The guard who was knocked to the ground finally got up. As he cursed loudly, he pulled out his sword and walked over. He grabbed the middle-aged man's hair with one hand and twisted his head. He shouted, "Country bumpkin, you don't want to live anymore, do you? I'll fulfill your wish today." The middle-aged man trembled and struggled with all his strength. But he was suppressed by the guard's accomplices and could not move. The surrounding people saw this scene and turned their heads. Although they could not help but feel a little sad, no one dared to stand out. The guard cursed as he raised his sword. But before he could stab down, a gust of wind swept open the carriage door and split it into two. The transparent ripple not only knocked away the sword in the guard's hand, but also sent it flying and pierced into a wooden door not far away. The guard suddenly screamed and held his bloody hand. His palm had been cut off at the wrist. This sudden turn of events shocked the guard's accomplices. They subconsciously pulled out their swords. Brando also pulled out his sword and came down from the carriage. The sound of swords being unsheathed could be heard. "Who are you?" the merchant at the back asked in a shrill voice. He could also see that Brando's sword was not ordinary. But when he saw that it was a young man and that he did not look like a noble, his vigilance decreased. In the end, this merchant had only stayed in Fortress Reden his whole life and did not have much experience. If he was a noble, he would have at least recognized the threat of Brando's sword. Brando glanced at him and was too lazy to say anything to this scum. However, this sword strike of his had changed his stance. The people who were bullied before were old and young, male and female. They had long disliked the other party's actions, but they did not have the ability or the courage to resist. Now that there was someone who seemed to have the ability to stand up for them, they subconsciously chose to stand by Brando's side. Not only did Brando become their savior, he also became their natural leader. Thus the atmosphere became strange. The merchant wanted to use his numbers to bully them, but when he saw the crowd behind Brando, he could not make up his mind. A herd of sheep was not scary, but if there was a lion leading them, then it was different. Brando was the lion leading the sheep. Of course, if the merchant knew that Brando alone could kill his mob 2 or 3 times, he probably would not think that way. He couldn't make up his mind. The wailing of the guard on the ground with a broken arm also made him feel distraught. It was at this moment that another group of people arrived on the field. Brando looked at their attire and recognized that they were Fortress Reden's security cavalry. Because Fortress Reden was guarded by the White Mane Army, it was a garrison, so there were no guards. The local security was usually done by the local guards and the security cavalry, but these two troops were not officially organized and belonged to the local noble council. In the early years, the appearance of the local guards and the security cavalry was a sign of the local power's growth. However, these non-professional local troops became the local tyrants. Compared to them, the merchant was probably a law-abiding citizen. In Brando's memory, the funniest thing was that the local guards and the security cavalry hated each other, to the point where they hired players to fight for territory. He had a deep impression of this when he did this series of missions. Thus, when he saw these people, he subconsciously felt a sense of disgust. "What are you doing here, fighting on the streets?" The tall and burly cavalry captain spoke with an air of arrogance. He glanced at the merchant and his expression softened a little. "Isn't this the dye merchant from Ponuo, Mr. Markov? How's your business?" Markov nodded with a fake smile. "It's fine, Captain Gaspard. But there's someone here who killed people on the streets and injured my men. What do you think we should do?" The cavalry captain frowned. If it was any other time, he would have the mood to blackmail this guy, but now that the city was about to be destroyed, he did not have the mood to do so. But he was used to being a tyrant, so he subconsciously put on a condescending attitude. "Who are you?" Brendel glanced at him and said flatteringly, "Dwayne." The cavalry captain frowned and looked at Brando suspiciously. But at this time there was a commotion behind the crowd, and there were screams of fear. "Monsters, monsters. There are so many monsters behind. It's the undead, everyone run." Madara's vanguard had arrived. The people behind suddenly sped up, and it was inevitable that they would affect Markov's guards and Gaspard's men in the front. But how could these guards allow the people behind to squeeze to the front? Immediately, they picked up their sheathed swords and desperately struck the heads of the people who were rushing up. The people behind were unable to advance or retreat for a moment, and cries and shouts immediately rang out. Gaspard frowned when he saw this. He was different from the country bumpkin merchant, and had seen the world. He knew that in this situation it was impossible to stop them, so he had to think of another way. But his gaze quickly fell on the heads of the people in front. "You," he pointed at Brando. "You get the carriage here and you come and block the road. Everyone else, get out of the way and let us go to the front." When he said this, the civilians behind Brando were stunned. Originally, the actions of Gaspard's group had already made these people secretly unhappy. They acted as if they didn't care about human lives, and used their swords to block the people behind them. Although the people in front didn't say anything as refugees, they couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. "Why?" someone in the crowd asked with dissatisfaction. "Nonsense." Gaspard ordered his men to get into formation and unsheathed his sword. "As a citizen of Fortress Reden, it is our duty to help the cavalry maintain order. What, do you want to resist?" Everyone looked at the cavalrymen lined up in a row, their swords gleaming coldly. Then they looked at the street behind them that was engulfed in a raging fire. The blue flames were indescribably eerie, especially when there were shadows of skeletons looming in the rising smoke. For a moment they did not know how to answer. Everyone's gaze fell on Brando. Damn it, it's not easy to stand out. Brando suddenly felt uncomfortable. However, when he saw the despair in the eyes of the civilians who were blocked by Markov's guards, he couldn't help but sigh inwardly. No matter what, half of his soul came from the modern world, and he represented a civilized society that was inclined towards order and peace. This was his greatest pride, and he couldn't allow it to be trampled on. He leaned forward slightly and entered the most basic attacking position in Erewhon's military swordsmanship. "I'll count to 10 if you don't leave by then, don't blame me for being rude," Brando said calmly. Everyone was taken aback. Especially Gaspard and Markov, they almost thought that there was something wrong with their ears. The cavalry captain felt like he was slapped in the face, and he couldn't help but become angry. He didn't even bother to hide his embarrassment and shouted, "Kill him!" The cavalrymen raised their swords and rushed forward. I'll continue writing and updating today, so please wait and see. Looking for a guaranteed monthly vote next month.